Chapter 68. Bold and visionary words. Jifeng knew that Peng Zhan had introduced Lin Yi to the school, and so he wanted to use this opportunity to get on Lin Yi's good side. After all, the 12th class wasn't just the 12th class, but the 12th class was also the 12th class. Moving Lin Yi to the 6th class would help him avoid further conflicts with Pinliang. Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh at the words. The guy was afraid that Pinliang and the others would cause trouble for him again. But Lin Yi's true goal was to keep Meng Yao company. If Meng Yao didn't change classes, he wouldn't be able to do so. Besides, Lin Yi didn't really care about Pinliang and the other clowns. They wouldn't dare cause trouble in front of him anymore. Thank you, Mr. Wang. I'm doing fine in this class. I just got used to the environment, and I don't want to change. Lin Yi rejected Wang Jifeng's kind intentions. I see. All right then. Don't be too rash in the future. Just report to the school first. The school will take care of it. Wang Jifeng didn't say anything else after Lin Yi's insistence. It seemed that Pinliang and the others would behave themselves for a while after this incident. The English test results came out during the night study session. As expected of an important class in an important school. Even when Kang Xiaobo said that the test was a bit difficult, the total score was 150. There were quite a few students who scored above 130. Kang Xiaobo scored 111, and Lin Yi scored 109. Naturally, Lin Yi did it on purpose. He just wanted his results to be below average in class. He didn't need to draw attention to himself. What surprised Lin Yi, however, was the fact that Meng Yao and Yushu had taken up 2 spots among the students who scored above 130. It seemed that these 2 rich girls weren't idiots after all. Lin Yi thought to himself, "Boss, not bad. Your first exam result is not bad." Kang Xiaobo saw that Lin Yi was only 2 points lower than him, and he was secretly surprised. There must be some luck involved, Lin Yi thought to himself. If he had known that this question would be difficult, he would have made a few more mistakes. Let's go eat something tonight? My treat? Kang Xiaobo had talked to Lin Yi about this at noon, but Lin Yi did not agree at that time and said that they would talk about it at night. Let's do it on the weekend. My house is quite far from the campus. If I go back late, there won't be a car, Lin Yi said to Kang Xiaobo apologetically. Oh, that's true. There are only a few buses near the school. Let's talk about it on the weekends. Kang Xiaobo obviously misunderstood Lin Yi's meaning. Lin Yi thought that Kang Xiaobo was a good person and that he didn't want to lie to him. But Lin Yi didn't want to expose the misunderstanding. Lin Yi really did mean that Meng Yao's villa was quite far from the school, and Faubert's car wouldn't be waiting for him all the time. There would be no car if he went back late. Lin Yi and Kang Xiaobo walked out of the school gate together after school. He watched Meng Yao and Yushu get into Faubert's Bentley from the corner of his eyes before turning to Kang Xiaobo. I'm going. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Kang Xiaobo was in high spirits today. He'd wanted to have dinner with Lin Yi and drink some wine, but Lin Yi didn't have the time. He had no choice but to give up on the idea. What's the rush? Stand right there. The sudden voice startled Kang Xiaobo. He looked up to see Pinliang, Naipeo, and Xiaofu blocking his way. The one who spoke was Gao Xiaofu. Pinliang called his family during the break and learned that Heibao had taken responsibility for everything, but Pinliang's father still gave him a good scolding. Pinliang was getting more and more pissed off. It was all Lin Yi's fault, and he couldn't afford to offend Lin Yi. All he could do was sulk. Xiaofu came up with a strategy. Since Lin Yi couldn't beat him right now, he could teach that Xiaobo beside him a lesson. The kid had been pretty cocky yesterday on the balcony, and now he'd gone up there and kicked Heibao bro in the crotch. Was he supposed to let him live if they didn't teach him a lesson? Pinliang's eyes lit up. He couldn't afford to piss off Lin Yi, but teaching that coward Kang Xiaobo a lesson would be good too. What? What are you guys doing? Kang Xiaobo had become a man these 2 days, but that was only because he had Lin Yi with him. He was the only one left, and he'd have to be tough even if he wanted to. It was obvious that the 3 were up to no good, and Kang Xiaobo felt a wave of fear rise in his heart. What are you doing? Don't you know what you've been doing these 2 days? Pinliang smiled coldly as he reached out and patted Kang Xiaobo's face. Kang Xiaobo, I never knew that you were a hidden character. What did I do? Kang Xiaobo knew that even if he begged for mercy, it wouldn't do anything. Since he was already enemies with Pinliang, he might as well go all the way. At most, he'd get beaten up, but he wouldn't be able to kill him. You're talking tough, aren't you? Pinliang looked like he had Kong Xiaobo in the bag. What? You dare to do it, but you don't dare to admit it? Or is it because that transfer student's backer is gone, and you're not confident anymore? Pinliang was finally able to vent his anger, but he felt a little sullen when he thought about it. He had to bully a normal student to vent his anger. Kong Xiaobo knew that he wouldn't be able to avoid the beating today. He was going to die either way, and he straightened his neck. Pinliang, if you touch me today, I'll pay you back tenfold, 100-fold. Come at me if you dare. With that, Kong Xiaobo closed his eyes, looking like he was going to die a martyr's death. Fuck, you're still so stubborn? Interesting. Brothers, what are you waiting for? Let's do it. Pinliang saw that Kong Xiaobo wasn't begging for mercy, so he stopped talking to him. Liang bro, Xiaofu suddenly tugged at Pinliang's sleeve nervously. What's wrong? Pinliang frowned. What's wrong? Xiaofu pointed not far away, panicking. Liang bro, look over there. What? Pinliang looked impatiently at the direction Xiaofu was pointing at, and was shocked to see Lin Yi walking towards him with a smile on his face. But in Pinliang's eyes, that smile looked like the smile of a demon. Why was he back? Didn't he leave already? Pinliang was startled. This Lin Yi was a madman. What was he supposed to do if he waited for Lin Yi to arrive? As humiliated and angry as he was, Pinliang didn't dare fight Lin Yi head-on. Fuck. Revenge is a dish best served cold. I'll return the humiliation I received today 100-fold in the future. Chapter 69. Chapter 69. Healing Plan. Pinliang didn't have time to explain as he turned and ran. Xiaofu and Naipeo saw that they weren't a match for Lin Yi, and so they turned and ran as well. Kong Xiaobo closed his eyes and stiffened his neck, ready to die a martyr's death. He waited for a long time, but Pinliang didn't move at all. He opened his eyes, confused, only to see the three running like rabbits, disappearing into a puff of smoke. Kong Xiaobo froze. What the hell was going on? Could it be that when he'd shaken his body, unleashed his king's aura, and said, I'll pay them back 10 times, 100 times in the future, he'd scared Pinliang and the others away? It couldn't be, could it? Didn't that make him the main character of a novel? A large hand landed on Kong Xiaobo's shoulder just as he was recovering from his shock. Kong Xiaobo jumped and turned around, only to see Lin Yi smiling at him. What are you spacing out for? Xiaobo paused when he saw Lin Yi. He immediately understood why Pinliang and the others had turned tail and run. It wasn't because he'd unleashed his king's aura, but because Lin Yi was here, and they'd run away. Let's go. There won't be any more cars later. Lin Yi patted Kong Xiaobo's shoulder before turning around and walking to the Faubert's parking spot. Lin Yi and Kong Xiaobo had separated earlier, and he'd noticed that Kong Xiaobo was surrounded by Pinliang and the others. Lin Yi, naturally, knew that Kong Xiaobo wasn't Pinliang's match, and so he went to help him. Kong Xiaobo took a deep breath, wanting to thank him, but Lin Yi was long gone. Kong Xiaobo clenched his fists. When would he become a man like Lin Yi? It had only been 2 days since he'd transferred here, and he'd already taught one of the big four Pinliang a lesson. Lin Yi returned to Faubert's Bentley, a frown on Meng Yao's face. She didn't say anything about Lin Yi getting in, but Yu Shu, on the other hand, smiled at Lin Yi. Shield bro, you're pretty good. Huh? Pinliang and the others turned and ran when they saw you? Yu Shu's words told Lin Yi that she must have seen him helping Xiaobo from the car. Lin Yi smiled, unsure of what to say. See, Yao Yao? I told you Lin Yi's good at his job, right? With him by your side, Pinliang won't bother you anymore. Yu Shu tugged at Meng Yao's hand. He's not that much stronger than Pinliang. Meng Yao himphed, puzzled. Was this Lin Yi really that good? Subduing Pinliang in 2 days? He's probably just a little better at fighting. Lin Yi was already used to Meng Yao's attitude, and he didn't mind it at all. She was a miss, after all, and it was always hard to please. As long as she didn't find him an eyesore, it was fine. He was here for a mission, after all, and the reward was enough for him to eat for the rest of his life. Back in the villa, Lin Yi remembered the awkward scene from this morning as he looked at the tissue box on the living room table. Yu Shu was looking at him suspiciously, and Lin Yi knew that this wasn't good. She'd better not come up with something for him to do again. Lin Yi hurried back to his room. He'd looked up some books on medicinal properties and pharmacology in the bookstore today, and Linny wanted to write them down while he still had an idea of how to treat Huijuan. Huijuan's entire body was in a mess under the effects of the medication. It was a combination of Eastern medicine and Western medicine. Huijuan was fine for the time being, but the slightest change in his body could turn into a fatal injury. It was impossible to treat all the damaged organs in one go, and even old Lin didn't have the ability to do so. Besides, he'd learned all of old Lin's teachings. After taking Huijuan's pulse today, Linny had determined that the cause of Huijuan's condition was a broken meridian. The meridians that connected the 5 viscera and 6 bowels of the body were broken, naturally affecting the function of the organs and leading to organ failure. Under these circumstances, Lin Yi decided to start with the damaged meridians first. As long as he could open up all the meridians, the organs would naturally recover. Huiping was only in his 20s, and his body wasn't in a failing phase yet. He could recover on his own. Lin Yi breathed out in relief after writing down a satisfactory prescription and treatment plan. Although Lin Yi was confident that he could help Huijuan recover, he was still a little worried before he could come up with a feasible treatment plan. Lin Yi sighed. The art of dragon mastery he practiced wouldn't be so troublesome if he could let Huijuan practice it. But he'd promised old Lin that he wouldn't tell anyone other than old Lin and his Shifu. Old Lin was Lin Yi's Shifu, but strictly speaking, he was more like a relative. Old Lin's skills weren't weak, but Lin Yi's killer moves were inherited from another Shifu. It was said that his Shifu and old Lin had gone through thick and thin together in the past, and that they'd been through life and death together. Of course, Lin Yi wasn't too clear about these things. He only knew a little about them. A soft sound came from outside the room, and Lin Yi's sharp senses picked it up. Putting away the prescription and treatment plan, Lin Yi quickly dashed to the door. But Lin Yi breathed a sigh of relief. It was Faubert delivering dinner, and that sound was probably Faubert opening the door. Lin Yi opened the door and walked out. Faubert, Mr. Lin, dinner's ready. Faubert nodded to Lin Yi with a smile. Faubert left quickly after delivering dinner, and Meng Yao locked the villa's door. She glanced at Lin Yi, who was walking back to his room after helping Yushu lay out the food. She wanted to ask him to join them, but swallowed the words back down her throat. Lin Yi was already in his room while she was hesitating. Forget it if you don't want to eat. Meng Yao was a little angry. She'd asked him to eat with her yesterday, and now he'd gone back to his room? Lin Yi would have screamed injustice if he knew what Meng Yao was thinking, and it was precisely because he was worried that the little miss wouldn't be agreed. He'd helped Yushu lay out the food and went back to his room, waiting for the two of them to finish eating before he went back to his room. Lin Yi didn't mind the two anymore. It was just like Kang Xiaobo said, there was a line of boys who wanted to eat Meng Yao and Yushu's leftovers at school. You're not going to ask Shield Bro? Yushu had wanted to ask Lin Yi to eat with her, but she wasn't sure if Meng Yao would agree. Ignore him, we'll eat, Meng Yao said angrily at the thought. Oh, Yushu said as she picked up her chopsticks. She pushed an open bottle of orange juice in front of Meng Yao all of a sudden. Yao Yao, this is for me. You can have it. Meng Yao's face darkened at the sight of the orange juice, evidently remembering what happened 2 nights ago. She glared at Yushu. Shu, did you do that on purpose? Nah, I'm just being nice. Yushu blinked innocently with her big, watery eyes. Chapter 70. Chapter 70. Lin Yi's weakness. Meng Yao and Yushu couldn't really eat much, after all. Before Lin Yi came, they'd always be left with more than 3/4 of their food. But for the sake of balanced nutrition, Faubert still stuck to 4 dishes and 1 soup every day, with at least 3 dishes and 1 soup. Even the best chef couldn't make too little of a dish. Not only would it be difficult to control the heat, but it'd also be difficult to control the balance of the seasonings. In order not to affect the taste, it was better to stick to the normal size. Meng Yao found the food tasteless after a couple of bites. Before Lin Yi came, she and Yushu would talk about interesting topics as they ate, and the meal would take more than half an hour. She didn't know why, but the scene of Lin Yi standing up for her at the bank kept popping up in her mind. Was this guy an idiot, or was he serious about his job? There was no point in risking his life for a few tens of thousands, was there? Meng Yao didn't know where her father found a guy like this, but her dislike for Lin Yi seemed to have lessened quite a bit. Was it because he saved her yesterday? Fine, She'd keep him by her side for now. It wasn't a bad idea to have him as a fighter. I'm full. Thinking back to her attitude towards Lin Yi, she felt that it was a bit too much to let him eat her leftovers. What's wrong? Yao Yao, why are you eating so little? Yushu looked at Ming Yao, a little surprised. The girl had only moved her chopsticks a few times, and it was still vegetables. It's nothing, just a little tired. Ming Yao shook her head. I'm going upstairs. Get Lin Yi to eat with you. Ah, Yushu blinked. What was Ming Yao up to? Ming Yao felt a little irritated. The guy she hated the most had saved her yesterday, and now he was putting on airs when she was trying to be nice to him. Humph, forget it if you don't want to eat. I won't eat either. You don't want to eat if you want. Yushu blinked in confusion as she looked at Meng Yao's exhausted figure. Could it be that what happened last night had scared her? That's not right. It's been a day and a night. Isn't his reaction a little too slow? Yushu put down her chopsticks and ran to Lin Yi's room, knocking on the door. Hey, Shield bro, come out and eat. Lin Yi opened the door and looked at Yushu. You called? Would I call Yao Yao Shield bro? In this villa, you're the only one who can be called brother, right? Yushu slapped her forehead. Oh, I remember now, General Weiwu, doggy bro. Lin Yi was speechless. Comparing himself to a dog? Let's go, time to eat. I'm starving. With that, Yushu walked towards the restaurant. Lin Yi looked at the restaurant, but Meng Yao wasn't there. He followed Yushu in, puzzled. Where's the miss? You said Yao Yao? She said she wasn't hungry, so she took 2 bites and went upstairs. With that, Yushu pointed at the seat Meng Yao had been sitting at. Sit. Hurry up and eat. The food's ready for you. Oh. Lin Yi looked at the table. The rice was already in front of him. Since Meng Yao had gone upstairs, Lin Yi didn't need to be courteous. Yushu was a little weird, but it wasn't a big deal. Gaga. Yushu looked at Lin Yi evilly as he picked up his chopsticks and put a mouthful of food into his bowl, shoving it into his mouth along with the rice. Joy blossomed in her heart, and she clenched her fists under the table. Yay. She'd tell Yao Yao later that she'd avenged her. She ate Lin Yi's saliva yesterday, and today Lin Yi used her chopsticks to eat the leftover rice. Lin Yi ate her saliva, and now they were even. Eat slowly. Here's some water. Yushu handed the orange juice to Lin Yi. Oh, thanks. Lin Yi really did feel like he was choking at Yushu's words. He took 2 sips of the orange juice and realized something was wrong. This orange juice. Oh, Meng Yao left after 2 sips, and I didn't want to waste it, so I gave it to you. Yushu said innocently as she looked at Lin Yi. Right, you wouldn't dislike her, would you? You wouldn't go rinse your mouth and vomit too, would you? Oh, Lin Yi replied, expressionless. He knew that Yushu was doing it on purpose, but it wasn't a big deal to Lin Yi. Back in the primeval forest, he'd basically used all his metal as weapons, leaving only a set of tableware for everyone to use. Lin Yi had long since developed this mentality. Plus, not everyone could just eat a beauty's saliva. Maybe that idiot Pinliang would go for Meng Yao's spit if she wanted to, Lin Yi thought evilly. Yushu was a little disappointed that Lin Yi didn't have any reaction, but then she remembered that she'd taken a sip of the orange juice before. Didn't that mean? Yushu couldn't help but blush at the thought. But after diluting Meng Yao's saliva, there shouldn't be anything up there anymore, right? Yushu comforted herself. Yes, that must be it. Hey, Shield bro, I'm thirsty. Get me a glass of water. Yushu ordered. She was starting to get a little salty. Go yourself. Lin Yi didn't even raise his eyes as he continued eating. Toilet paper. TV. Yushu coughed. Lin Yi rolled his eyes. This was a secret signal. What was with that? Lin Yi got up helplessly to get Yushu a glass of water. Yushu treated him pretty well, thinking about him even when she was eating. Lin Yi decided to hold it in. If Huaijuan knew that Lin Yi was serving the 2 misses all day, he'd probably be laughing his ass off. He poured Yushu a glass of water. Lin Yi knew that her glass was pink, so he was familiar with it. Thanks, Shield bro, Yushu said sweetly as she took the glass from Lin Yi. Lin Yi didn't say anything as he continued eating. Yushu was thinking that a little coquettish might make Lin Yi more willing, but she didn't think that she'd be showing it to a blind man. It seemed that in Lin Yi's eyes, the braised chicken on the table was prettier than her own. In actuality, Lin Yi wasn't blind. Who wouldn't be tempted by a beauty in front of him? But he was here on a mission, and this was just a short reunion. After the mission was over, everyone would go their separate ways, and they might not meet again for the rest of their lives. Lin Yi didn't want to leave too many emotional ties behind. Besides, he was arranged by Peng Zhan to accompany Meng Yao to school. What would happen if he messed with Meng Yao's best friend? One shouldn't be too much of a jerk. Chapter 71. Chapter 71. The mysterious Jade. Lin Yi went to clean the table after dinner. Faubert used to take away the food containers the next morning, and someone would clean them up when they got to the hotel. Lin Yi, however, didn't like the greasy ones and decided to clean them up. Shield bro, you're a good family man. Whoever marries you will be in luck. I'm going upstairs. Yushu encouraged Lin Yi before going upstairs. Marry me? Lin Yi felt a chill run down his spine. His first thought was that this girl had some sort of male chauvinist fetish. But Lin Yi was used to Yushu's weird antics anymore. He didn't say anything about it. Lin Yi put the containers back into the plastic bag before turning off the lights and heading to his room. The second 5-year period was drawing near, and Lin Yi was starting to get impatient. His body had changed a lot after practicing the first stage of the art of dragon mastery, and his meridians were firmer than before. His agility and agility were a lot better than a normal person's as well. In the eyes of a normal person, he'd be a master amongst masters, but this only made Lin Yi more expected. If the first stage was already like that, then what would the second and third stages be like? Besides, what other things would there be behind the stone door of the cave, other than the subsequent parts of the art of dragon mastery? Lin Yi touched the jade pendant in front of his chest. Just this pendant alone was enough to bring him endless benefits if there were other things behind the stone door. Just the thought of it excited him. He'd even saved the lives of his comrades and himself many times with just this pendant. Lin Yi still hadn't fully grasped the function of the pendant yet. But the pendant's ability was very mystical. It was as if it could read his thoughts. If someone wanted to harm him within a certain range, the pendant would send him a signal, letting him know in advance. It was because of this that Lin Yi and his comrades were able to survive the rain of bullets in the primordial forest time and time again. This was the Jade Pendant's early warning function. Another function of the Jade Pendant was that if there was someone who he had seen before and had tried to harm him within a certain range of him, even if that person concealed his murderous intent and did not release any malicious intent towards Lin Yi for the time being, Lin Yi could use the Jade Pendant's signal to gradually lock onto that person's existence. The closer he got to this person, the stronger the signal from the Jade Pendant. In the end, battles between experts would often turn into sneak attacks and assassinations. If the first strike failed, they would quickly retreat. They would not engage in a prolonged battle. Those who had fought with Lin Yi once, even if they escaped under the cover of Lin Yi, were still somehow found and killed by Lin Yi. As a result, Lin Yi's teammates called him Eagle. An eagle was an animal that rarely got away once it set its eyes on its prey. Of course, the jade had many other extensions. It could warn him of bad things, and it could warn him of good things as well. It was just that the signal was different, and Lin Yi didn't know how the jade was affecting him, but he didn't know how it was affecting him. At least the people around him weren't affected at all. But the signals that Lin Yi had figured out were only these three. Under other circumstances, the jade would also send out other signals, but Lin Yi didn't know what they meant, nor did he know what triggered the reaction from the jade. Yushu went upstairs and pushed open the door to Meng Yao's room. Meng Yao was curled up on the bed eating chips, an English textbook on her lap, marking today's exam papers. Eating too many snacks will affect your growth. Yushu looked at Meng Yao with a smile, remembering what happened to Lin Yi before. Her smile widened. What are you smiling at? Meng Yao was confused by Yushu's smile, feeling uncomfortable all over. She looked at herself from head to toe, but didn't see anything wrong with her. Wasn't it just a bag of chips? Was Yushu mocking her chest for not being as big as Meng Yao's? Yao Yao, let me tell you something fun. I've avenged you. Yushu sat on the bed sneakily, snatching the bag of chips from Meng Yao's hands. Didn't you say that eating snacks will affect your growth? Meng Yao glared at her. What revenge? Why are you being so secretive? Hee, I've developed very well. My height is very balanced already. Yushu popped a chip into her mouth nonchalantly. I called Shield Bro over for dinner after you left just now. You know what? Then, I told him to sit at your seat, told him that I've already filled his bowl, and he ate it. What's wrong with that? You're not trying to say that he ate my leftover bowl of rice, are you? Meng Yao's eyes widened. He even used your chopsticks, Yushu said proudly. What do you think? Now that he ate your saliva, he's avenged you, right? What nonsense. Meng Yao shook her head. Isn't he still taking advantage of me? Yushu thought to herself. You ate his saliva, so you're taking advantage of him? But thinking about it, that was indeed the case. If it were any other boy in school, they'd probably be happy about it. All right, let's not talk about him. Meng Yao was a little annoyed and didn't want to talk about Lin Yi. Aren't you going to tidy up the mistakes in the English test? Yeah, I'll do it now. Yushu stopped joking around and took out the test papers from her bag. She started tidying them up with Meng Yao. Meng Yao and Yushu weren't stupid, but it was useless if they didn't work hard. Meng Yao and Yushu were still working hard, especially since Meng Yao didn't want people to say that she'd gotten into a top class in a top school because of her family background. After tidying up the English test papers, the two went to study for other subjects. They were 12th graders, after all, and would be taking the college entrance exams soon. It wouldn't be hard for Meng Yao and Yushu to get into a top university with their family background, but it was different if they got in themselves. It wasn't early anymore, and Meng Yao yawned. Yushu, on the other hand, was a little sleepy as well. The two of them took a hot shower in the bathroom, and after watching an episode of Pleasant Goat and Big Big Wolf on their MP4, they fell asleep right after. Lin Yi, on the other hand, practiced the art of dragon mastery the entire night, replenishing his stamina after a night of training. It was more than enough for a few hours of deep sleep. It was already 5 in the morning when Lin Yi opened his eyes and let out a breath of turbid air. Lin Yi went to the washroom to wash up. He wouldn't watch TV this morning no matter what. Chapter 72. Being set up, Lin Yi had learned from Faubert that Meng Yao and Yushu ate breakfast in the school cafeteria every morning if he wasn't here. Lin Yi, however, didn't mind the hassle of cooking. There was some leftover rice from last night, and Lin Yi planned on making egg fried rice. It wasn't much trouble at all. Lin Yi put on his clothes and left the room, heading towards the dining room. He opened the fridge and found a ham sausage and a couple of eggs. Lin Yi wasn't worried that these things would expire. Faubert would always check on them and buy some fresh stuff to keep in the fridge. The two princesses rarely cooked for themselves, but it was always better to have something prepared. Meng Yao could fry an egg for herself when she was hungry at night. He couldn't find any onions after searching for a long time. The price of onions had gone up ever since the tossing onions song, and Lin Yi had no choice but to give up on using onions. Egg fried rice was something Lin Yi always made at home, and it didn't take long before a pot of fragrant fried rice was ready. Lin Yi scooped a bowl for himself, quickly finishing it before tossing the bowl into the sink and putting it back on the rack. Lin Yi didn't want yesterday's incident to repeat itself, either, so he decided to put the cutlery away after washing it. Perhaps he'd made some noise, but it wasn't long before Meng Yao and Yushu came downstairs in their pajamas, yawning and yawning. The two were wearing cartoon pajamas, looking very cute. It didn't seem to match their age, but Lin Yi understood when he remembered that they watched cartoons all the time. Girls, especially young misses, were a little childish. Still, the two beautiful legs beneath their pajamas made Lin Yi's blood boil. Couldn't these girls be a little more careful at home? Did they really think that he didn't exist? Didn't they think that he wouldn't push them down? Ugh, not really. Wow, Shield Bro, you prepared breakfast for us again. Yushu wrinkled her nose as she followed the scent to the kitchen. Ah, it's egg fried rice today, my favorite. Ahem. Meng Yao wasn't too happy with Yushu's obvious reaction. How could she let that Lin Yi get all cocky? Yao Yao, do you want some? Yushu took a bowl and filled it for herself before asking Meng Yao. I don't like it. Meng Yao still couldn't let go of her pride. Wouldn't eating Lin Yi's food be the same as eating his food? Although she ate it yesterday and the day before, today, sigh, little Shu was really something. She ate it, but she acted like it was delicious. Let's eat together. I cooked quite a lot. It'll be a waste if you don't eat. Lin Yi smiled, as if he could tell that Meng Yao wasn't telling the truth. Oh, teacher said we shouldn't waste food. I'll eat a little then, Mingyao said after some hesitation, using Lin Yi as an excuse. Linny didn't say anything. The miss knew how to be frugal now. You guys eat. I'm going out for a walk, Linny said, worried that Mingyao would feel awkward if he stayed. He turned around and walked out of the villa. Yao Yao, didn't you notice? Shield Bro's a very considerate man. He can fight, he can cook, and he's pretty handsome too. Yushu whispered to Mingyao as she ate. Shu, are you serious? 2 bowls of noodles and 1 bowl of egg fried rice is enough to melt you? You're already speaking up for him? Mengyao's eyes went wide as she looked at Yushu. You're not in heat, are you? You're the one in heat. Yushu blushed. I'm just afraid that someone else will get to him first, and you'll regret it. That Foxling Shan's pretty interested in Shield Bro. They've only known each other for 2.5 days, and they're already getting intimate with him. Him? Who cares? Mingyao curled her lips. I don't think he's a good person. Lingshan just needs to seduce him. Speaking of Lingshan, Yushu was a little troubled. Why did her brother like a woman like that? If he knew what was going on between Lingshan and Linny, he'd go crazy. Achoo! Linny sneezed as soon as he stepped out of the door. What was wrong with him? Did he catch a cold? It wasn't cold in the morning, was it? Of course, Linny didn't know that the 2 girls were talking about him while eating his egg fried rice. Linny had been living in the villa for 3 days now, but this was the first time he took a good look at the outside of the villa. This was obviously a place where the rich lived. Those who could afford a house here had to be rich or powerful. Yushu's identity made Linny suspicious. He hadn't seen her family before, but the fact that she lived alone in a villa meant that her family wasn't ordinary people. A black Ferrari came speeding from afar, the engine roaring loudly. When it got close to Linny, the Ferrari slowed down noticeably. The person in the car looked at Linny, confused. He'd seen almost all the young masters and ladies in the area, but Linny didn't look familiar. The Ferrari stopped in front of Mengyao's villa, and the driver rolled down the window. It was a young man. Hey bro, you just moved here, right? The young man asked Linny. Me? You could say that. Linny didn't know who this person was, but since he didn't show any other intentions, Linny gave him some face and replied, My name is Sunny Kai. If you have any trouble in the future, you can use my name. I'll take care of everyone in our Seaview Villa Bay. The young man said to Linny. Okay, thank you. Linny looked at the enthusiastic Sunny Kai and nodded. Although he didn't need anyone to take care of him, this Sunny Kai didn't seem to have any bad intentions, so Linny wouldn't reject him. Sunny Kai saw that Linny didn't seem to have heard of his name, so he smiled faintly and didn't say much. Bro, I haven't been to school for a long time. I have to go today. Let's meet another day. Goodbye. Linny waved at him. Sunny Kai started the car and left. From Sunny Kai's words, Linny also roughly understood that this Sunny Kai was probably very popular in society. Because he and Linny lived in the same villa area, he took care of the people in the villa area. However, this could also be seen as a kind of showing off. In any case, this Sunny Kai wasn't very annoying, and Linny didn't show anything to him. Chapter 73. Free Chef. It wasn't long before Faubert's Bentley stopped in front of the villa, and Faubert paused when he saw Linny standing there. Mr. Lin, why are you here? Faubert asked curiously as he got out of the car, looking at Linny curiously. I came out for some fresh air, and to see what kind of people live around here, Linny said. Faubert nodded. Mengyao and the others aren't out yet? I'll go get them. Mengyao and Yushu walked out of the villa as they spoke, laughing and chatting with each other. They greeted Faubert when they saw him and got in the car. Linny got in the passenger seat naturally, and Faubert started the car and drove slowly towards the school. The two had been whispering to each other ever since they got in the car. The Bentley was quite spacious, and Linny didn't want to eavesdrop on their conversation. He didn't really care what they were talking about. Yushu nudged Mengyao after a while. Why don't you tell me if you like it? What do I like? I'm just having a bite or two. It's fine if you don't tell me. Mengyao himphed, ignoring Yushu. Yushu didn't have a choice. She wrinkled her nose. All right, I'll tell you. Their voices were louder and clearer, and Linny could hear them from the passenger seat. but he didn't know what they were talking about. Faubert, can you get some fresh ingredients when you come back tonight? Yushu said to Faubert, who was driving. Oh, ingredients? Uncle Fu was slightly startled. Are they fresh vegetables and meat? Yeah, eggs, seasonings, and whatnot. It's fine as long as it's all there is. Yushu nodded. All right. Faubert was a little puzzled. He'd prepared fresh meat and vegetables for them before, but a lot of it had expired. Faubert only prepared a small amount after that, just in case. He didn't expect Yushu to ask him to prepare a whole bunch all of a sudden. Judging from Yushu's conversation with Ming Yao, there was an 80% chance that Ming Yao was part of it as well, and so Faubert didn't ask any questions and agreed without hesitation. Yay! Sister Yao Yao. Yushu raised her hand excitedly, intending to give Ming Yao a high five. Ming Yao glared at her. You only know how to eat. Let's see if you'll be able to get married when you turn into a pig. Lin Yi, on the other hand, was speechless. He'd be an idiot if he didn't understand what Yushu was up to. Buying so many ingredients, did he think he was a chef? Fuck his grandmother's leg. Wasn't he being wronged? Even a runny nose could be used against him. If word of this got out and his teammates heard about it, wouldn't they laugh their heads off? But it wasn't easy to explain, and the more he tried to explain, the worse it would get. Lin Yi could only endure it. He'd just treat it as a mission, and this reward was enough to feed him for the rest of his life. Lin Yi didn't think that it was a big deal now. Compared to the North African jungle, where even a spider could kill him, life here was much better. He could go to school, and he could hit on girls. Ugh, hitting on girls didn't seem very reliable. Lin Yi saw Yushu winking at him in the rearview mirror. He closed his eyes and pretended he didn't see it. Yushu squeezed her eyes for a long time, and finally found a few difficult expressions to piss Lin Yi off, only to realize that Shield Bro had closed his eyes. Yushu's anger flared up, and her face started cramping up. Shu, what are you doing? What's wrong with your face? Mingyao noticed something wrong with Yushu as well. It's nothing. It's just a toothache. Yushu held her breath. She couldn't tell Mingyao about this, or she'd laugh her head off. So it's a toothache. I thought your eyes were broken when I saw you squeezing your eyes. Lin Yi interrupted faintly, taking it as revenge for calling him a chef. Huh. Yushu smiled instead of getting angry. So the guy didn't just close his eyes and saw her face. Her cramping wasn't for nothing. Yushu was happy again at the thought. Shu, why are you smiling when you have a toothache? Mingyao didn't know what was going on, and she was even more confused when she saw Yushu grimacing. It's nothing. It's nothing. Yushu waved her hand. The car stopped in an alley near the school, and Mingyao stopped asking questions. The two got out of the car one after the other, and Lin Yi continued to sit in the car. According to the two, he had to avoid arousing suspicion. Mr. Lin, I'll take you to the hospital to change your bandages, Faubert said as he started the car. Change my bandages? Lin Yi remembered that his leg injury hadn't healed yet, and the pain was nothing to Lin Yi. Lin Yi wouldn't have remembered it if he hadn't brought it up on purpose. All right. Lin Yi thought that he'd have to go to the pharmacy later. He'd have to concoct some medicine first. Normal medicine would heal too slowly. He'd also have to concoct the medicine for Huaijuan. The car arrived at Songjiang's First People's Hospital, and Faubert parked the car while Lin Yi went down to change his bandages. Lin Yi didn't see the pretty nurse Guan Xian when he arrived at the surgical treatment room. The nurse on duty this year was a middle-aged woman, and Lin Yi felt relieved. Thank goodness she wasn't here, or it'd be awkward again. Hi, I'm here to change my bandages, Lin Yi said as he handed the document to the nurse. Oh, you can sit over there, the nurse said as she looked at the document Lin Yi handed over. She quickly prepared the bandages and said to Lin Yi, Pants off. Aren't we supposed to close the door? Lin Yi asked, a little embarrassed that the door wasn't closed yet. What's there to be afraid of, young man? Hurry up, the nurse said fiercely. This is a hospital. Who wants to look at your butt? Ugh. All right. Lin Yi was speechless. He thought back to how shy Guan Xian was yesterday. This nurse was probably a young girl back in the day, but time had turned her into a fierce ant. He wondered if Guan Xian would be the same in a few years. Lin Yi felt a chill run down his spine as he thought about it. His first impression of Guan Xian was pretty good. He had to admit, however, that the nurse was a lot more skilled than Guan Xian. She finished changing Lin Yi's bandages in no time and threw the cotton into the trash can. Done. You're recovering well, young man. Come again tomorrow and you'll be fine. Chapter 74. Chapter 74. The man in the washroom. Lin Yi had wanted to buy some Eastern medicine from the pharmacy near the hospital, but the prices there were a bit higher than usual. Lin Yi decided against it after some thought. He had some money on hand and Peng Zhan's bank card, but the Eastern medicine he needed wasn't something ordinary. Most of them cost tens of thousands of dollars. Mr. Lin, Mr. Chu called just now. He'd like me to bring you to him if you're free, Faubert said to Lin Yi after getting in the car. Oh, Uncle Chu's looking for me? Bring me to him then. You know, Faubert, I don't have much to do other than school. Lin Yi didn't know why Peng Zhan was looking for himself. Perhaps it was because of the bank robbery or the conflict with Heibao yesterday. All right, I'll contact Mr. Chu right now. With that, Faubert took out his phone and dialed Peng Zhan's number, telling him that he and Lin Yi were heading over right now. The security guards at the underground parking lot recognized Faubert's Bentley and opened the gate before the car even got close. Lin Yi didn't comment on the security guards' fawning behavior. Faubert's car was a bit more expensive. It'd take some effort to find an identical one with the same brand. But the robbers from that day weren't normal people. There had to be someone behind them. Fortunately, it wouldn't affect the company too much even if they entered the underground parking lot. So Lin Yi didn't say anything. They got in the elevator and arrived at Peng Zhan's office. Faubert knocked on the door and opened it to take a look. As the closest person to Peng Zhan, he naturally had the right to enter and exit the office at will, even if there were other people in the room. But Faubert closed the door after one look, turning to Lin Yi. Mr. Lin, Mr. Chu's talking to someone right now. Can we wait a bit? All right. Lin Yi nodded. Peng Zhan, as the chairman of a mega corporation, couldn't just sit around and wait for Lin Yi to come knocking on his door. There were plenty of things he could do in the meantime. I'm going to the washroom. Call me if you need anything. Okay, Mr. Lin, the bathroom is over there. Faubert pointed in the opposite direction of the chairman's office. On this floor, almost all the senior leaders of the group had their own restrooms in their offices, so they didn't need to go to the public restroom. Naturally, the farther the public restroom was from the chairman's office, the better. Lin Yi quickly walked to the bathroom. When he was about to reach the door of the bathroom, Lin Yi heard a man in the bathroom saying something in a low voice. It seemed like he was talking on the phone. Originally, Lin Yi didn't want to eavesdrop on other people's conversation. He didn't have the bad taste to pry into other people's privacy, but Lin Yi's hearing was very sharp. The man's mention of a name caught Lin Yi's attention. I've waited for this opportunity for so long. That Chu Mingyao girl went to the bank to get a card. Who the hell are you looking for? What kind of people are you looking for? The man seemed to be very angry as he shouted at the other side of the phone. He was afraid that others would hear him, so he tried to lower his voice. If it weren't for Lin Yi's exceptional hearing and the fact that he was standing at the door of the bathroom, even if others passed by, they wouldn't be able to hear what he was saying. The man had mentioned Chu Mingyao's name a few times before, and it had already caught Lin Yi's attention. When he walked to the door and heard the man talking about the bank again, Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. Lin Yi stood in front of the sink of the bathroom quietly, listening to the man's words. How can you ask me to cooperate with you if you can't even handle such a small matter? It's not a big deal. You just need to control that Chu Mingyao girl for a few hours. When they are discussing the contract with Peng Zhan, they just need to hint that Chu Mingyao's matter is related to you guys, and the contract would have been signed long ago. It's just a little hint. Even if that old fox Peng Zhan is angry, he'll swallow it for the sake of his precious daughter's safety. The man was obviously very angry. Humph, there shouldn't be any loopholes in this matter, right? What? You said that you don't know where the group of people you found are now? Motherfucker, how am I supposed to cooperate with a pig like you? The man cursed. All right, I'll get some information from the police station. You also need to deal with the tail as soon as possible. If you really can't, you understand what I mean, right? Ring dash, a sudden burst of classic Nokia music sounded, and the man in the bathroom stopped talking abruptly. It was obvious that he was shocked. However, the one who was shocked was Lin Yi. His phone rang, and Lin Yi smiled bitterly. It seemed like he had alerted the enemy. It would be very difficult for him to hear anything else. Just as Linny thought, the man in the bathroom was really shocked. The public bathroom on the top floor was almost never used. This was because the leaders of the company who worked on this floor all had their own bathroom. No one would come here to use the bathroom. Only those who came from outside to work, and some workers would use the public bathroom. This was also the reason why he chose to make the call here. In many cases, this bathroom would be cleaned by cleaners in the morning and night, and almost no one would use it during the day. Linny helplessly took out his phone and saw that it was Faubert's number. Linny directly hung up and mumbled to himself, "Junhua bro, it's Xiaoliang, Li Xiaoliang. I'm at Pingzhan Industries, but I couldn't find you. Which floor are you on?" "I'm already on the top floor. Don't all the executives of Xuanxi Industries work on the top floor? You're the business manager, so I came to the top floor to look for you." "What? On the third floor? All right, I'll go down. I was just about to use the bathroom." "What? The top floor is the territory of the big leaders? Forget it. I'm not going up. I'll go down first," Linny said as he walked out of the bathroom and walked towards Chu Pengzhan's office. On the other hand, Faubert didn't think much when he saw Linny hang up. After all, Linny was just going to the bathroom. Seeing that he called, Lin Yi would definitely ask him to come to Chu Pengzhan's office. The man in the bathroom heard Lin Yi's words and instantly let out a sigh of relief. He muttered, "Damn it, he's just here for business. I was scared to death. Looking for a business manager, and he even came to the top floor? What a big manager, and he's still a leader. This person is also an idiot. Doesn't he know that the salespeople call themselves business managers to make themselves sound better?" Chapter 75. Chapter 75. Pengzhan's analyst wanted to drag the man to Pengzhan's office in the washroom, but on second thoughts, the people who worked at the top of the company were either shareholders, general managers, or vice presidents. Not a single one of them was a small fry. Putting aside the fact that Pengzhan wouldn't be willing to admit it, Linny was afraid that this man wasn't just one person, but a group of people. Judging from the people he'd called, he had a lot of accomplices. Pulling him out wouldn't necessarily be the same for his accomplices. Besides, Pengzhan wouldn't be able to deal with someone at the level of a vice CEO with just a few words. There were bound to be a lot of factions forming when a company grew to a certain point, and Pengzhan was the biggest shareholder. He couldn't just touch the people of the other shareholders, and there was a high chance that the person on the phone was one of the shareholders. That was why Lin Yi decided to disguise himself as someone who came to the wrong floor to avoid alerting the enemy. That way, the man in the bathroom wouldn't suspect anything. Lin Yi walked to Pengzhan's office and saw that the door was open. Faubert was standing beside Pengzhan, reporting something to him. Pengzhan nodded repeatedly, a satisfied smile on his face. He raised his head when Lin Yi appeared at the door. "Lin Yi, you're here. Come in and have a seat." "Uncle Chu." Lin Yi closed the door behind him as he walked in. He wanted to talk to Pengzhan about what he'd heard in the bathroom. "Lin Yi, I heard that you got into a conflict with some gangsters yesterday?" Pengzhan asked straightforwardly after getting Lin Yi to sit on the sofa in front of his desk. Lin Yi could tell that Pengzhan's tone wasn't one of condemnation, but one of deep concern. This touched Lin Yi's heart. He was just a personal study companion he'd hired to accompany his daughter in her studies, and yet he cared for him so much. It was rare. However, Lin Yi also had some doubts. If it were someone else, the first thing they would talk about would be to fire him and not implicate his daughter. "Yes, someone called Zhong Pingliang sent him to deal with me." Lin Yi didn't try to hide anything as he told Pengzhan the truth, but I'm guessing that Heibao will take care of everything by himself in the police station, and Pingliang won't get involved. "Oh, Zhong Pingliang? Do you have a problem with him?" Pengzhan was even more puzzled. Lin Yi had only been in school for a few days. How did he make an enemy like this? From the looks of it, Pingliang had hired a criminal, even with a gun. Lin Yi smiled bitterly. "It's my fault. Mr. Chu, let me explain." Faubert saw that Lin Yi didn't mention anything about Meng Yao, and naturally knew that he meant well. But as Pengzhan's confidant, he didn't hide anything from Pengzhan. "Oh, you know about it?" Pengzhan blinked. He didn't expect Faubert to know about the conflict between Lin Yi and Pingliang. "Mr. Chu, it's like this." Faubert nodded with a bitter smile. That day when the Miss saw you, Mr. Lin, she wasn't too satisfied with Mr. Lin acting as her shield, so she wanted to test it out. It just so happened that Pin Liang was the Miss's pursuer, and he kept bugging the Miss, so the Miss asked Mr. Lin to deal with him. All right, there's no need to continue. I get it. Peng Zhan shook his head with a bitter smile after listening to Faubert's story. This was all his precious daughter's fault. Yao Yao likes to mess around, so don't give in to her. She needs someone to keep her in check. Don't mess around with her next time. We almost got into big trouble this time. If it weren't for your skills, who knows what would have happened? Haha, Uncle Chu, I'm fine. Linny was speaking the truth. He really didn't see Heibao Bro as a threat. A small fry like him would only be cannon fodder in the front lines. This Zhong Pinliang. I'll have to talk to Principal Ding Bingong about it. A student like him shouldn't be allowed to stay in school. Peng Zhan was quite pissed off at this Zhong Pinliang. Mr. Chu, this Zhong Pinliang is Director Jin's nephew. Li Fu reminded Chu Yin as he had a record of all this information. Oh. Peng Zhan frowned. He didn't expect this Zhong Pinliang to have such a connection. Peng Zhan was the chairman of Peng Zhan Industries, the biggest shareholder, but there were many other shareholders in the board of directors. They didn't have as many shares as Peng Zhan, but they still had a lot of weight. As a result, Peng Zhan couldn't afford to offend the other shareholders over such a small matter. Peng Zhan Industries was one of the shareholders of Songshan's first school, so naturally, Director Jin was one of the shareholders as well. Ding Bingong wouldn't be able to handle things like this. Peng Zhan thought about it for a moment. He'd be graduating soon anyway, so he gave up on the idea of changing Zhong Pinliang. Uncle Chu, don't worry about it after this incident. Zhong Pinliang's probably going to behave like a coward in school from now on. Linny didn't care about him at all. Yeah, I'm really sorry about this. I may be in charge of a corporation, but there are many things that I can't do. Peng Zhan sighed. Uncle Chu, I was just about to talk to you about this. Linny saw that Peng Zhan had changed the topic to company management, so he didn't have to find an excuse anymore. Uncle Chu, have you figured out what happened with the bank robbery that day? Right now, I only suspect that there's something unusual about it, but I haven't figured it out yet. Peng Zhan didn't try to hide it. We can already confirm that they were after Yao Yao. Robbing a bank was just an excuse. They didn't make a move on Yao Yao earlier or later, but they just had to make a move on me when I was out in the city for business. This motive is very suspicious. Lin Yi praised inwardly. Peng Zhan was indeed the helmsman of a large corporation, being able to come up with such a conclusion with just a few clues. It wasn't bad at all. His suspicions weren't far from the truth. Chapter 76. What kind of mission, but this is the first time I'm working with their company. They probably don't know me that well, so I don't have any evidence to back up my suspicions. Peng Zhan shook his head, as if denying his own guess. Uncle Chu, I heard a man talking on the phone when I went to the washroom. Lin Yi told Peng Zhan what he'd overheard. Peng Zhan frowned as he listened to Lin Yi's words. He'd suspected that there was something wrong with the company he'd been working with earlier, and they'd almost signed the contract. But when he'd arrived, they'd been using all sorts of excuses to push the contract away, as if they were waiting for something. They'd been looking at the time non-stop, and when the contract didn't come, they'd come up with an excuse, saying that the contract wasn't ready yet, and that they needed a meeting to discuss it. Peng Zhan was pissed at the company for going back on their word, but the contract hadn't been signed yet, and they had the right to go back on their word. Peng Zhan could only say a few words about working with them in the future before leaving in a hurry. However, the other party's actions had raised his suspicions. He hadn't thought much of it at first, but after learning that Ming Yao had been kidnapped by the bank robbers, Peng Zhan wondered if there was a connection between the two incidents. But on the surface, the two incidents didn't seem to be related at all. Peng Zhan couldn't find any connection between the two, and he only had his suspicions. But after listening to Lin Yi's words, Peng Zhan understood everything. The other party hadn't intended to be sincere from the start, and they'd resorted to kidnapping his daughter to force him to achieve their goal. Indeed, if his daughter hadn't been rescued by Lin Yi and had been kidnapped instead, Peng Zhan would have had no choice but to agree to some benefits for his daughter's safety, as long as the other party revealed the slightest bit of information during the negotiation. The other party could have denied everything afterward, since it was only a bank robbery, and his daughter had only been taken as a hostage. With this layer of cover, the fact that the other party had carried out the kidnapping would have been easily covered up. No wonder the other party kept looking at the time, as if they were waiting for something. This was what they were waiting for. From what Linny had said, the man on the phone in the washroom had to be someone high up in the company, since he was on the top floor of the company. With this person working together, the other party's plan was flawless. But of all things, of course, they hadn't considered the possibility of Lin Yi's presence. It seemed that of his daughter's side had been a wise decision after all. Peng Zhan had only arranged Lin Yi to stay by Meng Yao's side of the company, of his mind of all of his plans. Of all, Peng Zhan hadn't thought of anything else. Yet, Lin Yi of his. I will look into this matter. I'll investigate this. Peng Zhan's eyes flashed fiercely. He might have had conflicts with some of the higher-ups in the company, but he wouldn't allow anyone to use his daughter to mess things up. Lin Yi nodded. He didn't want to get involved in these things. As the chairman of the company, Peng Zhan naturally had his own methods. Lin Yi only told Peng Zhan what he'd heard. As for how to carry it out, that was up to Peng Zhan. You didn't alert the enemy, did you? Peng Zhan suddenly thought of an important problem. Did Lin Yi alert the other party when he was eavesdropping in the washroom? If the other party was alerted, it'd be difficult to catch the other party's tail. Don't worry, Uncle Chu. Lin Yi smiled. I was shocked when Faubert called, but I pretended to be someone who came to the company for business and went to the wrong floor. Lin Yi told Peng Zhan everything he'd said to himself. Haha, not bad. You're quite alert. Peng Zhan praised. The more he looked at Lin Yi, the more pleased he was with him. At first, it was his old father's wish, and Peng Zhan was just following the old man's wishes. But now, he truly felt that Lin Yi was a rare talent. Peng Zhan's father, Chu Sanhua, was a man of authority in the family. He'd started out as a small bricklayer, building up Peng Zhan Industries from scratch. Now that Peng Zhan Industries was in Chu Peng Zhan's hands, Chu Sanhua was still a man of authority in the family. Peng Zhan's family was very poor when he was young, and Chu Sanhua established Peng Zhan Construction when he was 7 or 8, growing it up step by step. That was why he wasn't tainted by the bad habits of those rich second generations. He also had the demeanor of a big family and was very respectful to his father. Many of the shareholders in the company were old friends who had built up the company with his father. Although the shares were now in the hands of their children and grandchildren, some of them were starting to get restless, but Peng Zhan didn't do anything to them out of consideration for his father's face. But today's incident had crossed Peng Zhan's bottom line. Meng Yao was his only daughter, and these people dared to mess with his daughter. This was the first time Peng Zhan had been angered. Right, Uncle Chu, can you tell me what mission you have for me to do? Lin Yi asked after some hesitation. He'd better take advantage of today's opportunity to ask this question. He'd been in Songshan for a few days now, and he hadn't seen any important missions for him to do, other than accompanying Meng Yao to and from school, making her breakfast, and taking care of a few clowns. It was an easy life, but Lin Yi didn't feel at ease. He was here for a big mission, and it was said that this mission would be enough for him to eat and drink for the rest of his life. But Lin Yi didn't think that accompanying the miss to school would be enough for him to eat and wear for the rest of his life. Oh, a mission. Peng Zhan looked at Lin Yi oddly. It's a very important mission, but the most important thing right now is for you to build a good relationship with Meng Yao. That's the only way to ensure the success of the mission. Wah! Lin Yi was startled. Build a good relationship with Meng Yao? Only then could he carry out the mission? Just what kind of mission was this? Could it be that it had something to do with Meng Yao? Could it be that there was someone behind the scenes who wanted to harm Meng Yao, and Peng Zhan wanted to use Meng Yao as bait so that he could find the person behind the scenes? That was the only thing Lin Yi could think of. Peng Zhan's words didn't make sense, and he was still confused. But according to Lin Yi's experience in missions, most employers would keep their missions a secret. They wouldn't reveal the details until the very last moment. Chapter 77. Killing Intent. Uncle Chu, I'll be heading to school if there's nothing else? Lin Yi had said what he needed to, and the rest was up to Peng Zhan. All right. Peng Zhan nodded. Don't tell Yao Yao about what happened today. I don't want her to be troubled. Don't worry, Uncle Chu, I won't say anything. Linny stood up and prepared to leave. Li Fu, send you to school. Peng Zhan instructed Faubert. All right, Mr. Chu. Faubert nodded. No need. I'll just get a taxi downstairs. Linny said quickly. He'd planned on going to the pharmacy, and he didn't want Faubert to follow him. There were some things he didn't want others to know. That's fine. Peng Zhan didn't insist after Linny said so. I'll leave Yao Yao's safety in your hands before I deal with the company's problems. Huh. Lin Yi waved his hand. Uncle Chu, my mission has something to do with Miss Chu. Naturally, I won't let anything happen to her before the mission is completed. Peng Zhan nodded, sighing softly. He'd thought that he'd let Lin Yi take advantage of the situation, but it seemed that Lin Yi wasn't too interested in Meng Yao. He didn't know what his father was planning, but whatever he said, he'd do as he'd said. Li Fu, inform the administrative department, tell them to prepare a meeting room. I'm having a board meeting in the afternoon. Peng Zhan didn't insist when Lin Yi refused to let Faubert see him off because he had something he needed Faubert to arrange. All right, Mr. Chu. Faubert nodded before leaving Peng Zhan's office. Peng Zhan had a secretary, but there were many things he couldn't let his secretary know. Only Faubert, his confidant, knew. So, in many cases, Faubert took on the role of a secretary. Lin Yi walked out of Peng Zhan's building and flagged down a taxi. Young man, where are you going? After getting in the car, the driver pressed the odometer on the meter and asked, Sir, do you know where I can buy wholesale Chinese medicine? Lin Yi wasn't familiar with the geography of Songshan, but some of the older taxi drivers were living maps. They knew everything about the city like the back of their hands. Oh, are you talking about Chinese medicine? The ones made from twigs and twigs, or the ones made from twigs? The driver didn't know what Lin Yi was looking for. Huh. Lin Yi couldn't help but chuckle at the driver's description. In the eyes of normal people, Chinese medicine was more or less the same as sticks of grass. Loose sticks of grass. Lin Yi didn't bother correcting them. The girl wasn't a professional, after all, and it was fine as long as she could understand him. If you're talking about wholesale, you'll have to go to Qiaonan Village's Chinese medicine wholesale market, the driver said, but it's not in the city. It'll take half a day to get there. If you don't want to buy much, you can go to a bigger pharmacy. Lin Yi gave up on the idea of going to the wholesale market after hearing the driver's words. He didn't need to go there right now, at least. He could buy some at the pharmacy first. Then help me find a bigger pharmacy. That's easy. The driver started the car. After a few turns, the car stopped in front of a big pharmacy. It seemed that the driver didn't go around in circles. The fare on the meter was still the starting fare. Lin Yi paid the fare and thanked the driver before walking into the pharmacy. When he entered the pharmacy, Lin Yi sighed. It seems that medicine is a very profitable industry no matter when. There are so many people buying medicine in the pharmacy during the day. Many common medicine counters are already full of people. However, Lin Yi wanted to buy Chinese herbal medicine. There were relatively few people buying this kind of thing. He handed the list in his hand to the salesperson. The salesperson gave Lin Yi a receipt and asked him to pay. Lin Yi needed a lot of Chinese medicine. It would take a while to weigh it. Fortunately, there were no other customers. Lin Yi took advantage of the time when the salesperson was weighing and walked around the pharmacy. Jinchuang medicine. A voice caught Lin Yi's attention. Jinchuang medicine? Lin Yi was stunned. There is such a medicine? The so-called Jinchuang medicine referred to metal objects such as knives. In ancient times, the weapon that hurt people the most should be weapons. Therefore, Jinchuang also referred to weapons, and Chuang meant wounds. Therefore, Jinchuang medicine referred to medicine that specialized in treating metal injuries, such as knife wounds. Its effects were hemostasis, analgesia, and anti-inflammatory. However, Jinchuang medicine was just a name in ancient times. There didn't seem to be any medicine called Jinchuang medicine now, right? No, it's sold out. The salesperson answered the person who asked for the medicine with a blank expression. Lin Yi took a look. The person who asked for the medicine was a girl in black. She was wearing a navy cap on her head. The brim of the cap was very low, and her face couldn't be seen clearly. After getting the reply from the salesperson that the medicine was sold out, the girl didn't say anything. She turned around and left, but her steps were a little unsteady. Suddenly, Lin Yi's eyes were fixed on the girl's feet. On the ground that the girl walked on, there was a clear trail of blood. Obviously, it flowed down the hem of her pants. However, in this pharmacy with people coming and going, it didn't attract anyone's attention. The blood trail was quickly stepped on by the people walking back and forth. The reason why Lin Yi paid attention to this girl was because Lin Yi was a little curious about the Jinchuang medicine she mentioned. Secondly, it was because Lin Yi sensed a trace of the same kind of aura from her, murderous aura. Murderous aura was a very mysterious thing. Murderous aura was actually a signal emitted by animals when they attacked each other. This signal needed to be detected by the sixth sense. Someone once did such an experiment. They put a wild cat and a mouse in a box, separated by two thin soundproof boards in the middle. The distance between the two boards wasn't very far. Then, they eliminated the smell, and they couldn't see each other. As a result, the cat seemed to sense something and wanted to pass through the board. It kept scratching the board with its claws, while the mouse curled up on the other side. It could be seen that the cat could sense that the mouse was next door, and the mouse could also sense the cat. But how did the cat and the mouse sense each other? According to the explanation of scientists, this might be the sixth sense in addition to the five senses of animals. In other words, they didn't use their ears, nose, or eyes to detect each other. Animals could use their sixth sense to sense a signal emitted by their natural enemies or other animals that wanted to attack them. This signal could be interpreted as murderous aura. Chapter 78. About or note: a normal person might not be able to detect the murderous aura radiating from the girl, but Lin Yi, who was in the same line of work, could keenly sense it. It could also be called a sixth sense. But while Lin Yi noticed the girl didn't notice Lin Yi. After all these years of training, Lin Yi was able to conceal his murderous aura very well, but people who could reach Lin Yi's level were few and far between. In the end, Lin Yi shook his head. The girl's dressing was obviously to avoid attention. Even though she was injured, Lin Yi didn't want to help her. She might be in the same line of work, but the same line of work didn't want to be disturbed in the middle of a mission. Sometimes, people in the same line of work belong to different organizations, and they might even be enemies with each other. "Excuse me, what is golden creation?" Lin Yi asked the salesperson casually. The salesperson froze, then looked at Lin Yi as if he was an idiot, as if Lin Yi's question was stupid and naive. She didn't even bother to answer. "It's a surgical medicine, of course. We don't have it in stock." Lin Yi smiled wryly. It seemed like it was a new drug, and one that sold well. But while the salesperson didn't bother to answer Lin Yi's question, there was someone else who answered Lin Yi's question enthusiastically. Before Lin Yi could say anything, an old woman beside Lin Yi started chattering away. "Young man, you don't even know what golden creation is? You know Dr. Kong, right? Dr. Kong from a traditional Chinese medicine family. He's one of the leading figures in the Chinese medicine world." The old lady started talking about Miracle Dr. Kang's exploits. Golden creation is a quick healing medicine that Miracle Dr. Kong came up with. It can heal wounds so quickly that there won't even be a scar left. How is it? Amazing, right? So godly? Lin Yi did not expect Dr. Kong to be so amazing. His medicine was actually on par with his own. "That's right. I heard that it's a secret recipe passed down from generation to generation. This golden creation is given priority to the military. Due to the production capacity, a small amount of it is regularly supplied to the private pharmacies. That's why it's in high demand." The old lady said, "It's almost impossible to buy it from a pharmacy. My niece's boyfriend's third sister's aunt's fifth cousin is the manager of the supply and marketing department of XX pharmacy chain. Last time, I used his connections to buy a bottle. I heard that once it arrived, it was digested internally. How could it be sold on the shelves? Right?" Lin Yi thought, if this medicine is really as magical as this old woman said, it is not impossible for it to sell well. Of course, especially for young girls, it's so ugly if they get a scar on their body. It's not to heal the wound quickly, but to not leave a scar. The old lady said, "I heard that nowadays, people don't give platinum or gold as gifts anymore. Instead, they give golden creation as gifts." Really? Lin Yi was stunned. He did not know whether this old lady was telling the truth or not. Of course, Why would I lie to you? The old lady preached as if she was taking advantage of her seniority. Oh, I see. Thank you, but it seems that I don't need it for the time being. Linny said to the old lady with a smile. Yeah, you're a big boy. You don't need that thing. The old lady nodded. Obviously, she misunderstood Lin Yi's words. Lin Yi meant that he could make the medicine himself. There was no need for him to buy it. Lin Yi naturally would not explain. He turned around and went to the Chinese herbal medicine counter. The herbs that he wanted had been weighed and put into a sealed bag according to the type. Lin Yi checked carefully and found that 2 of the herbs seemed to have been stored for too long. They had gone bad, and the medicinal effect was greatly reduced. Lin Yi had no choice but to weigh a little more. He would win with numbers. He checked the utensils and tools that he wanted. After making sure that there were no problems, he carefully packed them up and left the pharmacy. It didn't matter if it was Chinese or Western medicine these days. They were all selling very well. Only the loose herbs weren't that popular in pharmacies, and not many people bought them. This was why Lin Yi was able to get out of the shop so quickly. After leaving the pharmacy, Lin Yi did not plan to go to school directly. He was already absent. It didn't matter whether he went or not. He had already bought a series of measuring tools and tools. Lin Yi wanted to find a place to make the medicine first. This kind of thing, of course, couldn't be done in school. Of course, he couldn't do it in Meng Yao's villa. The 2 girls would go crazy if the whole house smelled like Chinese medicine. The best way was to get a room by the hour and leave after he was done. With this idea in mind, Lin Yi was not in a hurry to go to school. Instead, he looked around the pharmacy to see if there was a suitable hotel to get a room by the hour. Lin Yi saw the girl from the pharmacy at the entrance of a deserted alley. At this moment, she was lying on the ground. There was a pool of fresh blood under her. Lin Yi frowned. He didn't want to poke his nose into other people's business, but in this deserted alley, who would dare to poke their nose into other people's business, let alone if there were people passing by? If he failed to save her and she died, it would cause unnecessary trouble. Lin Yi hesitated for a moment. He was also a person with a mission. It was not appropriate for him to poke his nose into other people's business. Moreover, in his line of work, he needed to be prepared to sacrifice himself at any time. Although, Lin Yi also knew that if he didn't help her, she might not survive due to excessive blood loss. However, sometimes, Lin Yi really couldn't do anything, especially this kind of thing that had nothing to do with him. It was obviously a troublesome thing. The girl didn't look like an ordinary person. Lin Yi really couldn't poke his nose into this kind of thing. Gritting his teeth, Lin Yi walked past the girl quickly. When he passed by the girl's body on the ground, Lin Yi couldn't help but look at her with pity. I hope you can make it. After that, he left quickly. But he didn't take more than a few steps before coming to a stop. Wait, that glance just now made Lin Yi see something that seemed familiar, but he wasn't sure. Lin Yi turned around and walked back to the girl's side. He bent down and stared at a ring on the girl's right little finger. When he saw the pattern on it, Lin Yi sighed and quickly touched the girl's wrist. He found that there was still a pulse. Lin Yi carefully helped her up from the ground and carried her on his back. Although the girl had fainted because of excessive blood loss, she still had some instinctive reactions when Lin Yi carried her. She subconsciously struggled twice. Perhaps it was a conditioned reflex to the outside world. Chapter 79. Origin. When Lin Yi had first arrived, he'd seen a motel by the roadside, but it didn't look too good. Lin Yi had decided to look around for a better motel instead. But the situation was urgent, and Lin Yi didn't have the time to look for another motel. One was already good enough. Get a room. Lin Yi barged into the motel with the girl on his back. The owner was watching TV out of boredom when she saw a young man barging in with a woman in black on his back. The man wanted to get a room as soon as he entered, and she couldn't help but smile ambiguously. Her motel was actually quite low class. It was set up to provide a place for young couples without money to cozy up to each other. Most of them didn't care if the place was high-end or not, as long as it was quiet and clean. The owner had seen plenty of young men and women who came here to get a room, but it was rare to see someone as impatient as Lin Yi, wanting to get a room as soon as he entered with a woman on his back. 15 kwai for an hour, 60 kwai for a day. The owner said to Lin Yi. Oh, I'll put down 100 then. Lin Yi pulled out 100 kwai from his pocket and handed it to the owner. Wait, take out your ID card to register. The lady boss was not blinded by the sight of money and did not let down her guard. Lin Yi frowned. He wasn't sure if the girl on his back could make it, but there was nothing he could do about it. It was reasonable to register a room, so Lin Yi took out his ID and handed it to the owner for registration. I don't need hers, do I? Lin Yi asked. Naturally, he was referring to the girl on his back. He believed the owner would understand what he meant. No need, Deng will be fine. The owner followed the rules when registering IDs. She wasn't trying to make things difficult for Lin Yi, but registering one person per room was fine. After scanning Lin Yi's ID, the owner took out a room card. Upstairs, room 209. Go up yourself. Thank you. Lin Yi took the room card and quickly carried the girl upstairs. Along the way, the girl lay motionless on Lin Yi's shoulder. If it weren't for the fact that he could feel her heartbeat through the softness of her chest, Lin Yi would have suspected that she was already dead. Who? Lin Yi threw the girl on the bed, then carefully closed the door, drew the curtains, and carefully checked every corner of the room. After confirming that there were no wireless cameras, he was relieved. To be honest, if Lin Yi hadn't suddenly seen the ring on the little finger of the girl's right hand, Lin Yi wouldn't have bothered with this kind of thing no matter what. She was just looking for trouble for herself for no reason. The pattern on the ring on the girl's hand represented an organization, a very famous international assassin organization. Although Lin Yi did not belong to this organization, the founder of this organization had a deep relationship with Lin Yi. The master who taught Lin Yi assassination techniques was one of the founders of this organization. Although old Lin was good at martial arts, he was proficient in the kind of martial arts that could be used to fight enemies head-on. However, in a real mission, it was rare to face the enemy head-on. Assassination and sneak attacks were the key to victory. When Lin Yi was 6 years old, old Lin sent him to his master for 2 years of intensive training. His master taught him all the assassination and sneak attacks methods. Although he didn't know the specific identity of his master, and old Lin never mentioned it directly, Lin Yi could vaguely tell that his master was a really powerful person. It had been many years since he saw his master. All these years, Lin Yi had always missed his master. He was Lin Yi's true master. Although old Lin also taught Lin Yi many things, it was more like the kind of relationship between grandfather and grandson, and not the relationship of master and disciple. Moreover, old Lin never expected to be Lin Yi's master. Lin Yi only learned less than 30% of his master's methods, but he was already able to take the initiative in missions. One could imagine how powerful his master was. However, he was too young at that time. Even if he studied hard, it would be good if he could understand 30%. It was because Lin Yi remembered his master's kindness that when Lin Yi saw the symbol of the organization his master founded on the ring on the girl's hand, he changed his mind and decided to help the girl. Although his master had long stopped caring about the affairs of the organization, no matter what, this girl was still one of his people. I'll help you this once. Whether or not you can survive will depend on your luck. Lin Yi laid the girl flat on the bed, and the fisherman's hat on the girl's head slid to one side. Her short, black hair was scattered, and through the scattered hair, a slightly pale and delicate face could be clearly seen. Her facial features were very exquisite, and her eyelashes were long. However, her eyebrows were tightly knitted together. Even if she had fainted, she must have been in a lot of pain. Lin Yi was slightly stunned. He didn't think that under the fisherman's hat, the girl would hide such a beautiful face. This made Lin Yi a little surprised. Such a beautiful girl was an assassin? Looking at the girl's age, she should only be around 18 or 19 years old, similar to him. Lin Yi shook his head, but this was someone else's matter, and he had no right to interfere. From his previous observation, the girl's injury should be on the lower half of her body. However, the girl was wearing a pair of leather pants that didn't leak blood, so he couldn't tell where the injury was from the outside. Lin Yi was too lazy to look for it, so he directly used some force and took off the girl's leather pants. After taking it off, Lin Yi felt a little unnatural, and his breathing became rapid. Although Lin Yi's initial thoughts were very good and very pure, he only extended a helping hand to this dying female assassin because of his master's face. That was why he helped her take off her pants and treat her injury. However, If this female assassin looked like a male assassin, Lin Yi probably wouldn't have any special thoughts. However, this female assassin was very beautiful, and her figure was very good. Therefore, when Lin Yi took off the female assassin's pants, it was inevitable that he would have some improper thoughts. Any normal man would have such thoughts. However, what he saw next completely extinguished the fire of lust in Lin Yi's heart. The inside of the leather pants was completely dyed red with blood, and under the leather pants, the girl's pantyhose was completely soaked in blood. It was impossible to see the original color. Chapter 80. Healing. From the looks of it, the girl's pantyhose was probably attached to the wound. If he took it off, it might touch the wound and cause more bleeding. Lin Yi frowned. There weren't any surgical tools in the room. When he took off the girl's pants, Lin Yi had felt something hard. It was probably a dagger. Without any other tools, Lin Yi could only rely on the dagger. Picking up the pants, Lin Yi took out the dagger and swung it in the air a few times to test the feel of it. Then, he started moving it back and forth on the girl's pantyhose. Lin Yi was an expert when it came to knives. When he was 6 years old, he had been practicing with the dagger with his master. It was also one of the most common weapons used against enemies. Lin Yi only used the tip of the dagger to pick up the fiber connection of the pantyhose. He wouldn't hurt anything else. After a few moves, the girl's pantyhose was shredded to pieces. Lin Yi casually peeled it off and tossed it aside. Under the pantyhose, Lin Yi finally saw where the wound was. It was at the root of the right side of the thigh. The wound had been bandaged, but the bleeding didn't stop. Otherwise, the girl wouldn't have gone to the pharmacy to buy some Dr. Kang's golden wound. Other than the bandage, the girl's lower body was only left with her thigh. But Lin Yi didn't have any other thoughts. Lin Yi wasn't a psychopath. Even if she was as beautiful as a goddess, Lin Yi wouldn't be interested in a woman covered in blood. He used a knife to pry open the gauze on the girl's leg and started inspecting the wound. The injury was serious, but Lin Yi breathed a sigh of relief. It hadn't reached the artery in her thigh. He'd have to send her to the hospital if he didn't have professional surgical equipment, but whether or not she'd make it to the hospital was another matter. The wound was triangular. It was obvious that a sharp tool like a triangular knife had been used to stab into the wound. Due to the triangular shape of the wound, it was difficult to stop the bleeding with ordinary hemostatic medicine without suturing. Judging from the current situation, it was most likely that the girl had bandaged herself after getting hurt, but the wound didn't heal. Instead, it was bleeding profusely. She had no choice but to go to the pharmacy to buy Miracle Dr. Kang's golden creation, but she hadn't found it yet. On the way back, she finally fainted from blood loss. Lin Yi understood what the girl was doing. Assassins were a special profession, and they rarely went to the hospital even if they were injured. They'd take care of themselves if they could, in order to reduce the possibility of their identities being exposed. Knowing the girl's injury, Lin Yi could treat of the problem. The wound was deep, but it didn't hurt the arteries and tendons of the body. It wasn't a big problem. Lin Yi stood up and took out the Chinese medicine he bought at the pharmacy before. He quickly threw a few herbs into the utensils and ground them. This was a familiar process for Lin Yi. In the North African jungle, his own herbs were the most popular things among his teammates. Lin Yi had to grind a bag of them every time. It was impossible to use the gauze from before. It had been soaked in blood. Because the incident happened suddenly, Lin Yi wasn't prepared. Now he could only consider using other things as a replacement. Although his school uniform was newly changed in the morning, Lin Yi didn't want to take a piece of it off to bandage the female assassin. He got up and went to the bathroom, but he saw a disposable disinfectant bath towel on the shelf. Next to the bath towel, there was a small price tag with 40 yuan written on it. This kind of disposable disinfectant bath towel wouldn't exceed 20 yuan if purchased in bulk, but the price in the hotel was doubled. Of course, in addition to this kind of bath towel, there was also a bath towel provided by the hotel, but it wasn't disposable. This kind of bath towel was only provided to those who had mysophobia and loved cleanliness. It wasn't a compulsory consumption. Lin Yi took this kind of disinfectant bath towel. This thing was barely enough to be used as a bandage. He sprinkled the previously ground medicine on the girl's wound. The girl's mouth made a low, inaudible sound. It seemed that the medicine had touched the wound. However, Lin Yi didn't care about her. How could it not hurt to apply medicine? After sprinkling the medicine, Lin Yi tore the disposable bath towel into a few pieces and skillfully bandaged the girl's wound. Phew! Lin Yi breathed a sigh of relief. It's finally done. Now it seemed that the girl just lost too much blood. If the bleeding was stopped now, the chance of survival was still very high. Of course, the vitality of an assassin was generally very tenacious. Lin Yi probably saw that the girl had regained her life. After waking up, apart from being a little weak, there was nothing serious. After dealing with the female assassin, Lin Yi got back to work. He'd made the medicine for the girl in a hurry, so he'd only made the right amount according to the need. Lin Yi's own wound hadn't even been healed yet. It was all ground, so it wasn't a big deal. The medicine for Yang Huaijuan, however, had to be brewed slowly. The order and timing of each ingredient had to be strictly added. There couldn't be a single mistake. Even if the ingredients were similar, the effect of the medicine would be greatly reduced, and the desired effect wouldn't be achieved. This was why Lin Yi didn't give the prescription to Huaijuan, choosing to make it himself instead. This prescription wasn't as easy as the painkillers he'd given Huaijuan before, where all he had to do was buy all the ingredients and grind them together. Decocting this medicine, however, was different. On the other hand, Lin Yi didn't want this recipe to get out. He trusted Huaijuan, but he was afraid that Huaijuan would accidentally leak it out. This recipe would cause a huge uproar in the Eastern medicine world. Lin Yi found a place to set up the alcohol stove and clay pot, and started brewing the medicine for Huaijuan. The hotel had appliances for brewing tea, but it was still better to use fire to brew the medicine. Brewing medicine was a very tiring job, but it was nothing for Lin Yi, who often made straw sandals at home. Lin Yi looked at the time on his phone as he skillfully put each ingredient into the clay pot. After who knew how long, Lin Yi heard a small movement not far behind him. If it weren't for Lin Yi's unusually sensitive hearing, he wouldn't have been able to hear it. Lin Yi didn't turn back. He was at a crucial point in brewing the medicine, and Lin Yi couldn't afford to be distracted. Lin Yi counted the time on his phone as he pinched the ingredients in his hands. Chapter 81. Mr. Dongwu. Lin Yi didn't expect the girl to be grateful to him, but it didn't seem like she was going to let him go. Just as Lin Yi was concentrating on the medicine, a murderous aura came at him from behind, and the jade on his mountain twitched as well, sending a signal of danger. Lin Yi frowned, but Lin Yi didn't want to be distracted at a crucial time like this. Stop it! Chi-Chi was feeling very conflicted. She'd fainted on the way out from the pharmacy due to blood loss, but Lin Yi had pulled off her pants, and the pain had helped her regain some of her senses, clearing her head a little. Her body was still too weak, and she didn't even have the strength to open her eyes before fainting again. When Lin Yi was treating her wounds and applying medicine, Chi-Chi woke up from the pain once more before fainting again. As a result, Chi-Chi had a rough idea of what had happened after that. It was this man in the room who'd saved her, but at the same time, he'd seen a lot of things he shouldn't have. Her face, her legs. These were things Chi-Chi couldn't tolerate. She'd killed her savior after crossing the river, and that made her feel uneasy. But her beauty had only blossomed for one man in this life. This man in the room had crossed her bottom line. With that decision made, Chi-Chi picked up her dagger by the bedside and crept up behind Lin Yi. She paused noticeably at the sight of him, concentrating on the medicine. Was he brewing medicine for her? Chi-Chi's heart warmed, and she didn't have the heart to make a move. Chi-Chi had to admit that her heart wasn't as cold as other assassins, cold and emotionless. No matter what, this man in the room was her savior. Just as Chi-Chi was hesitating, Lin Yi told her to stop it, like he was scolding a child. Chi-Chi was visibly taken aback. She was going to kill him, and he was telling her to stop? Did he think that she was just going to walk around the room? Didn't you hear the story of Mr. Dongwu when you were young? Lin Yi still didn't turn around. He continued, I feel like I'm like Mr. Dongwu in that story. Chi-Chi's face changed. Naturally, she knew about Mr. Dongwu's story. She'd grown up in an assassin organization, but she was different from the other assassins. Other than the assassin training, she'd received other forms of education. Mr. Dongwu's story was actually a classic fable. It was about a man named Mr. Dongwu who saved a wolf, But the wolf turned around and wanted to eat Mr. Donghua. But Lin Yi's words reminded Chi-Chi that Lin Yi's don't mess around wasn't just for show. Lin Yi knew that she was going to kill him. The story of Mr. Donghua that he told later proved this point. He was insinuating that he was ungrateful. Who was this person? Chi-Chi's heart skipped a beat. He could tell that she was going to harm him with his back turned, and yet he didn't react at all. Was he fearless? Or in that case, the purpose of this person's treatment of his injuries was questionable. Chi-Chi felt a chill in her heart and made up her mind. The dagger in her hand sped up, going for Lin Yi's neck without hesitation. Lin Yi didn't think that this assassin wasn't done yet. Was she trying to bully him with both hands? Lin Yi frowned and turned his head, dodging Chi-Chi's dagger. He opened his mouth and bit down on the dagger, as well as Chi-Chi's fingers. Ah! Chi-Chi's hand was in pain, and the dagger flew out of her hand. Her body hadn't recovered yet, and it was only through sheer willpower that she was able to stand up and walk behind Lin Yi. After the dagger left her hand, Chi-Chi collapsed onto the floor, panting heavily. The wound on her leg seemed to have been aggravated as well, and cold sweat dripped down Chi-Chi's forehead. Lin Yi spat the dagger to the side and continued brewing the medicine. You really are an ungrateful person. But it's fine. A good man doesn't fight with a woman. Leave now, or I'll kill you after I finish brewing the medicine. Chi-Chi understood now that Lin Yi wasn't a normal person. How could a normal person dodge her sneak attack? Could a normal person bite down on a dagger? Chi-Chi, on the other hand, understood from Lin Yi's words he wasn't making the medicine for her. She was the one who thought too highly of herself. Chi-Chi's eyes were filled with humiliation and unwillingness. She wasn't an impulsive person, and as an assassin, she couldn't be impulsive either. Impulsive assassins would be killed first, and wouldn't be able to live until now. Since Lin Yi could easily take her dagger away with both his hands occupied, Chi-Chi gave up on the idea of fighting again. She wasn't a match for Lin Yi. Even when she wasn't injured, she couldn't guarantee that she'd be able to handle this man. There wasn't any killing intent on this man, not even a hint, but the feeling she got from him was unfathomable. He was truly unfathomable. In the organization, he would only have this kind of feeling when he was facing his own father. Chi-Chi silently picked up her leather pants from the floor. There was blood inside, but it was already dried. Other than being a little uncomfortable, it didn't affect her appearance. The problem was that there weren't any other clothes in the room. Don't forget to close the door when you leave, Lin Yi said as if he had eyes on the back of his head. Chi-Chi left the room and slammed the door shut. I'm sorry, this man saved my life, and I'm not a match for him right now. But don't worry, I'll remember him, and one day I'll kill him with my own hands, because I'm only your Shao-Chi. Chi-Chi swore in her heart. In actuality, Chi-Chi wasn't called Young Chi-Chi at first. Chi was just a code in the Assassin's graduation training group. She was the youngest, so naturally, she was the 7th. The other members of the group were named by numbers as well. On the other hand, Shield Bro Lin, who was brewing medicine in the room, didn't know that his good intentions were being remembered by others. Achoo! Lin Yi sneezed. It wasn't like he hadn't smelled the medicine before. Why was he sneezing now? This was the second sneeze today. Lin Yi sniffled. Did he really have a cold? Chapter 82. It was too cruel. Chi-Chi's wound had stopped bleeding, but her body wasn't healed yet. Her face was still pale, and she was limping. Even so, she didn't want to stay in the room. Since she couldn't kill Lin Yi, she'd just leave and come back when she had the chance. That was the rule of an assassin. If she couldn't win, then she wasn't an assassin. She was a Suicide Squad member. Limping down to the first floor, Chi-Chi went to the bar. Boss, what's the name of the man who brought me to room 209? Chi-Chi didn't ask Lin Yi's name, because she knew that Lin Yi wouldn't answer even if she did. Lin Yi treated her like a passerby, and she was trying to kill him. Lin Yi wouldn't go looking for trouble. But Chi-Chi wasn't an idiot. She knew that she had to register when staying at the hotel. She'd been unconscious at the time, and she didn't have any identification on her. It had to be Lin Yi. Oh. The boss paused, but came out immediately after seeing Chi-Chi's attire. She was the woman on the back of the man who'd rushed to get a room. It couldn't be, right? They didn't know each other, and they'd gotten together, getting a room? But looking at her, she'd been carried. Was she drunk? If that was the case, then it was possible. Young men and women these days. The boss sighed at the degeneracy of the world, but she didn't think that her hotel would still be doing so well if it weren't for these young men and women coming to get a room. His name is Lin Yi, the boss said as she looked at the registration book. Thanks. Chi-Chi nodded, committing the name to memory. Lin Yi. Huh? She didn't know if it was a real name or a fake one, but whatever it was, Chi-Chi hated the name. You're welcome. For the boss, it was nothing more than a matter of lifting a finger. Chi-Chi memorized Lin Yi's name before turning to leave the hotel. The boss couldn't help but click her tongue as she limped out of the hotel. It couldn't be, right? That much? Can't even walk? That man just now didn't look very powerful, but he was actually so powerful? Could this be the girl's first time? The lady boss shook her head and thought evilly in her heart. To Lin Yi, Chi-Chi's incident was nothing more than a small interlude. Lin Yi wasn't too happy about the fact that Chi-Chi had stabbed him. He'd saved her life after all, and although he'd only seen her thigh, how was he supposed to treat it if he didn't? According to her, if she were to kill someone for looking at her thighs, she wouldn't be able to see the nurse today. Should he also take a knife and kill that auntie? Although the firepower of the alcohol stove was not as strong as that of the gas stove, it could still be used if it was controlled well. The decocted decoctions were placed into sealed bags bought from the pharmacy. Because the decoctions were hot, there was naturally steam. When the decoctions cooled down, the steam would turn into water, and the seal bags would become a vacuum. This was good for preservation, and the decoctions would not deteriorate. After everything was done, Lin Yi put away the medicine brewing equipment. He could still use these next time. The alcohol was pretty much all gone, but these things were sold everywhere. He didn't think he'd left anything behind, so he called the reception downstairs and told her to check out. But when Lin Yi's eyes landed on the bed, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that he'd have to pay for it. There were blood stains all over the bedsheets, evidently. It didn't take long for the owner to saunter into the room. It seemed that this hotel usually didn't have any attendants, and she was the only one running the place. Lin Yi had opened the window before the owner came up, letting in some fresh air. The smell of the medicine wasn't that strong, and the owner didn't notice it at all. She was stunned by the blood on the bed the moment she stepped into the room. Lin Yi's eyes widened as he stared at the blood on the bed. You, this bedsheet? The owner pointed at the bedsheet in the room, shocked. She couldn't speak. She was too shocked, too shocked. She'd been thinking that it was Chi-Chi's first time, and that was why she was limping. Now that she saw the blood stains on the bedsheets, it only confirmed her evil thoughts. But, at the same time, she thought that Lin Yi didn't know how to be gentle with the fairer sex either. It was his first time, and he was already in such a terrible state. Was he trying to kill her? Was he trying to kill her? If someone were to die in her hotel, she'd be in deep trouble. At that thought, the owner's face darkened. This bedsheet was at least 10 kwai, and with the money she made for the room, she didn't have much left after the bedsheet. What did you do to the room? The owner asked coldly. I'm sorry, I'll pay you for it. Lin Yi didn't know how to explain, so he just told the owner that he'd pay the full price. Since Lin Yi was willing to pay, naturally, the owner didn't say anything else. She thought that this kid was quite smart, or she'd have been waiting to insult him. After checking the room, the owner said, 1 disposable towel, 40 kwai. 1 bedsheet, 60 kwai. 100 kwai in total. All right. Lin Yi nodded. This owner wasn't too unscrupulous. This kind of white bedsheet cost 30 kwai in bulk. She sold it to me for 60 kwai, which was the same price as the towel. It was just double the price. The owner saw that Lin Yi was straightforward, so she didn't say anything else. Then, you come downstairs with me. Let's calculate the room fee. You've rested in the room for 5 hours, so I'll have to charge you according to the standard for a day. It's 60 kwai. You paid me another 60 kwai. Lin Yi nodded. After he went downstairs, he took out the money and gave it to the owner. Then, he turned around and prepared to leave. Wait. The owner stopped Lin Yi. Is there anything else? Lin Yi turned around and asked. He wondered if the owner felt that it wasn't worth it and wanted to extort him again. The girl you brought just now asked for your name before she left. I told her. The owner saw that Linny was so straightforward, so she kindly reminded him. Based on her intuition, the two of them definitely wouldn't be a couple, so the owner said a few more words. Linny smiled bitterly. He didn't want to have any contact with the female assassin anymore, but he didn't expect that the female assassin actually remembered his name when she left. Probably, there would be trouble in the future. After leaving the hotel, Linny looked at the time. It was already 2:00 in the afternoon. He hadn't had lunch yet, but for Lin Yi, a meal wasn't very important. Chapter 83. The Big Four. The school was still quiet when he got to the school. Classes hadn't ended yet. Linny walked up to Class 5's classroom and peeked in through the window. It was a self-study class, with no teacher present. Linny pushed the door open and walked in. A lot of people raised their heads to look at Linny before going back to their own stuff. The 12th grade was a very tight class, after all, and nobody liked to stick their noses into other people's business. Yushu poked Ming Yao with a finger. Yao Yao, Shield Bro's here. So what if he's here? What does that have to do with me? Ming Yao frowned, dissatisfied with Yushu's actions. Shu, why do you pay so much attention to him? You're not really into him, are you? I'd see a living person walking into the classroom if I raised my head. Yushu shrugged. I won't talk about it anymore since it has nothing to do with you. Ming Yao opened her mouth, but didn't say anything. She just shook her head and went back to reading the notes in her hands. Yushu smiled faintly at Meng Yao's reaction before going back to her own stuff. Shu, what do you think about this Linny guy? He went to change his bandages early in the morning. Why's he only here in the afternoon? Don't tell me he's hooking up with Lingshan again? Meng Yao turned around suddenly. I thought you didn't pay attention to him anymore? Yushu smiled at Meng Yao. He is my father's shield. He is not honest with me. He goes out and messes around. Of course, I am not happy. Meng Yao didn't know why she was suspecting Linny, but she found a good reason. Linny was hired by her dad, and he had to be worth the money. Then go talk to him and tell him not to be a playboy. He can only be a shield for you. Yushu suggested casually. What do you mean by me? Meng Yao's face turned red. Shu, your words are so evil, so ambiguous. It was originally you alone. It was your daddy who hired him, not my daddy. Yushu said matter-of-factly. If you don't think that's a good idea, then let him be my shield. I might not need him in high school, but I might need him in college. Screw you. You already have your brother. Why do you still need a shield? Meng Yao said with a smile, feeling a little uncomfortable inside, especially since Yushu felt like she'd stolen something from her. Pinliang shrunk his neck subconsciously when Lin Yi entered the classroom. He'd been scolded by his father and told to behave himself. As far as he was concerned, it was all Lin Yi's fault. However, he also knew that he was not Lin Yi's opponent barehanded. Even Heibao Bro with a gun wouldn't be a match for Lin Yi, let alone barehanded. The kid was too strong. And so, Pinliang knew that he couldn't use the usual methods for revenge. He was waiting for an opportunity, a chance to teach Linny a lesson. As for Kong Xiaobo, Pinliang thought about it carefully after going back yesterday. Since Linny was so protective of him, he might as well let the kid go. It wouldn't be worth it if he got beaten up by Linny later. Hey boss, you're finally here. Kong Xiaobo was very excited to see Lin Yi. He waved at Lin Yi as soon as he entered the classroom. What are you doing, sitting there and waving? Do you think you're the president? Lin Yi smiled as he kicked Kong Xiaobo's leg and sat in his seat. Boss, you don't know, but Pinliang was very low-key today. You didn't come and he didn't cause any trouble for me. Kong Xiaobo said. Isn't that good? Lin Yi said. Is there anything going on today? No, it's just yesterday. The school made a simple announcement, saying that outsiders came to cause trouble and were arrested by the police. Kong Xiaobo said. Fuck. It's just that Pinliang's family has connections, and the school is protecting him. Everyone knows that it was Pinliang who hired those people. Heh. Lin Yi heard from Faubert that Pinliang's uncle was a director of Pengzhan Industries, so naturally, he was one of the shareholders of the school. It was normal for the school to protect Pinliang. Right, boss? Guess how everyone is describing you now? Kong Xiaobo lowered his voice and said excitedly. Describing me? Describe what? Linny didn't know what was going on. Boss, you are now one of the big four in the school. You have replaced Pinliang and successfully become the third of the big four. Kong Xiaobo said as if it was something to be proud of. Big four? Linny felt a chill. When did he become one of the big four? He had always been low-key, and didn't even dare to do well in exams. How did he become famous? Moreover, looking at Kong Xiaobo, it was as if being one of the big four was a glorious thing. It made Linny speechless. Yeah, boss, if you beat the big four again, then you will become the big four's big four's big four's big four. Kong Xiaobo added. Big four? Linny was speechless. The big four's big four's big four's big four's big four. That was even worse than the third. But Linny couldn't do anything about it. After all, the fight with the outsiders yesterday was a fact. Heibao might have come to the school to cause trouble, but other people wouldn't think that way. They would think that he was the kind of student who liked to fight and beat up Pinliang's people. Naturally, he could become one of the big four. The class bell rang, interrupting Lin Yi and Xiaobo's conversation. Linny wasn't too interested in the big four's name, but he couldn't do anything about it since it was Xiaobo's mouth that belonged to Xiaobo. But after thinking about it, Linny felt that this was his image anyways. It would be easier for him to be Meng Yao's shield in the future. He just needed to stand there and people would think, who dares mess with me? And I'm a tyrant. The last class on Friday was physical activity class. Physical activity class was a class where students could go outside or stay in the classroom to study. It was the only class of the 12th grade that allowed them to relax every week. Even the students who were working hard would choose to relax during this class. They would take a stroll around the school, or stroll around the music store, snack street, or accessory store in front of the school gate. Chapter 84. You go after them. Lin Yi wasn't worried about Pinliang's actions at all. Pinliang might be a little hard to deal with in school, but he wouldn't do anything out of line. Meng Yao had Yushu by her side, and Meng Yao's family background wasn't something Pinliang could do as he pleased. Even if his uncle was a shareholder of Pengzhan Industries, Pengzhan wouldn't let him off the hook that easily if he tried to force himself on Meng Yao in public, even if his uncle was a shareholder of Pengzhan Industries. As a result, Lin Yi didn't plan on following Meng Yao and Yushu. Even if Lin Yi had wanted to, Meng Yao's personality wouldn't have allowed him to tag along. Lin Yi might as well focus on his own things instead. Boss, want to go eat some barbecue at the food street in front of the school? Kong Xiaobo had a date with Lin Yi last night, so he wanted to grab a drink or two with Lin Yi during physical exercise class. He'd been in high school for 3 years, and he'd lived to the age of 18. He'd only felt like a real man these few days. Sure, Lin Yi said happily. He hadn't eaten anything in the afternoon. Lin Yi placed the things he'd brought back from the hotel in his desk, placing a few books on the outside to prevent them from falling out. Only then was he able to leave with peace of mind. Most of the students had already left the classroom by the time the two left. There were only a few nerds left in the classroom. You couldn't count on these nerds to go out and play. These people spent all their waking hours in books. Kong Xiaobo slowed down subconsciously as they passed by 12th grade class 9. Lin Yi was curious about his actions, but Kong Xiaobo tugged at Lin Yi excitedly just as he was about to ask him about it. Tang Yun. Lin Yi was taken aback. He subconsciously looked forward and saw a girl walking out of grade 12 class 9's classroom not far away. After the girl walked out of the classroom, she also walked towards the staircase. Lin Yi did not see her clearly. By the time Kong Xiaobo called out, it was already too late. Lin Yi only caught a glimpse of the girl's side profile, followed by a ponytail. The girl was wearing a school uniform. She was very tall, but because the uniform was a little loose, he couldn't see her exact figure. However, since she was called the school belle, she couldn't be bad. It was just a glimpse, but she gave off the feeling of a beautiful girl in a romance game. She had a strong academic vibe. She was indeed a popular commoner beauty. How is it? Kong Xiaobo danced with joy. He was very excited as if he had won the lottery. I didn't see it clearly. What can you tell from the back? Lin Yi patted Kong Xiaobo. Why are you so excited? She's not your girlfriend. Heh, of course not. But to be able to see her from afar is already very exciting. Boss, don't you think it's fate? Kong Xiaobo was still very energetic. You see Chu Mingyao and Yushu every day. Then why don't you have epilepsy? Linny found it a little funny. Looking at him now, he really looked like he was having epilepsy. Isn't that different? Chu Mingyao and Yushu. I don't have any thoughts about them at all. They won't fall for me. I don't have talent, and I don't have money. Why would the miss like me? But Tang Yun is different. She's close to us. She's from a normal family. At least I have some thoughts about her, Kong Xiaobo said. Huh. Linny smiled. But he couldn't deny that Kong Xiaobo's thinking was right. Chu Mingyao and Yushu drove a Bentley to and from school. They lived in a villa. If they didn't have a certain background, they wouldn't dare to make a move. Boss, why don't you go after her? You're in the limelight right now. You're famous in the whole school. I believe Tang Yun has heard of your name. Kong Xiaobo suddenly suggested. Huh. Linny paused. Isn't she your dream girl? Heh, not only mine. She's the dream girl of many boys in the school, Xiaobo said with a chuckle. But dream lovers are meant for dreamings. I know my limits. You think I'd win 5 million? It's possible. Linny nodded. Maybe you could ask me for some advice when you're buying the lottery, who knows? Maybe you'll really win 5 million when my jade comes into play. Fuck. Kong Xiaobo was speechless. He rolled his eyes. I think the chance of Tang Yun liking me is lower than me winning 5 million. Now you know, right? I'm just imagining things. But I think you have a chance. Come on. Why don't you say Zhong Pingliang has a better chance? He used to be one of the big four. Why didn't I see him getting her? Linny shook his head. He didn't want any scandals. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to explain it to Chu Mingyao. Do you know where I'm taking you? Kong Xiaobo said mysteriously. Where to? Aren't we going to eat barbecue? Linny asked. Yes, but do you know who's selling the barbecue? Xiaobo winked at Lin Yi. You're not going to tell me that Tang Yun sells it, are you? Lin Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry at Kong Xiaobo's mysteriousness. Bingo! Kong Xiaobo clapped his hands. It's Tang Yun's mom. Tang Yun's mom? Linny froze. Ugh, not that motherfucker. I mean Tang Yun's mother's. Xiaobo coughed, realizing that his mother's name didn't sound good. It's her mom's barbecue stand. Linny didn't know what to say. Boss, I'm telling you, Tang Yun usually helps her mom with the barbecue stall when she's in class. If we go eat barbecue now, we might be able to see Tang Yun. Kong Xiaobo pulled Lin Yi and quickened his pace. Let's go. We'll follow Tang Yun. Following Kong Xiaobo's actions, Lin Yi felt that his heart had become younger again. It was filled with energy. These few years, he was either assassinating or carrying out dangerous missions. He spent most of his time in a rain of bullets. It was rare for him to relax like this. It was only at this moment that Linny realized that this was what he should be doing at his age, wasn't it? As Kong Xiaobo pulled him to follow the school beauty, Linny felt a sense of excitement in his heart. Following the school beauty was something many boys of his age did. Chapter 85. Established facts. If even Kong Xiaobo knew about it, Zhou Ruoming naturally knew about it as well. After the third period, he brought a group of men to the food street outside of the school. He ordered some skewers and beer and waited for Tang Yun's mother's barbecue stall. Tang Yun's mother, naturally, knew about Zhou Ruoming. She knew that he was the bully of the school, but he didn't usually come to her stall. She didn't know what was up with him today, bringing so many people with him. Mrs. Tang was still a bit afraid of Zhou Ruoming. There used to be a seafood stall on the food street that got a stomachache from Zhou Ruoming, and the next day, Zhou Ruoming and his men smashed up the stall. Not only that, but the stall owner was beaten black and blue and couldn't come back for a couple of days. The other vendors on the food street were naturally wary of Zhou Ruoming's tyranny. They all tried to find out who he was, and found out that he was one of the big four. From then on, Zhou Ruoming's stall was as careful as they could be, afraid that something would go wrong. They'd even give a small discount when they calculated the bill, afraid that Zhou Ruoming wouldn't be happy about it. Mrs. Tang wasn't the only one selling barbecue on the food street. Zhou Ruoming and the others used to eat at a barbecue stall at the front of the street, to which Mrs. Tang secretly rejoiced. A small business like this didn't make much money, and if something went wrong, she'd have to pay for it. Young brothers, please enjoy your meal. Mrs. Tang carefully placed the chicken wings on Zhou Ruoming's table, but the more careful she was, the more mistakes she made. Mrs. Tang's hand shook when she put the chicken wings down, and the seasoning on the chicken wings fell onto the leg of a fat guy next to Zhou Ruoming, leaving a greasy stain. Sorry. Mrs. Tang was at a loss as to what to do. She was terrified of these young masters, afraid that they'd get up and smash the stall if they didn't like what they were doing. How about, I help you wipe it? I can help you wash it too. Ever since Mrs. Tang had been laid off, she had been relying on the barbecue stand to support the family. Her lover had been bedridden due to a leg injury, but the compensation from the factory had never been paid. She had tried a few times, but the factory's leaders had rudely kicked her out. Mrs. Tang was a typical housewife who lived at the bottom of society. She was humble and weak, but she had no choice but to rely on her own two hands to support the family. She earned money to pay for her daughter's education and her lover's medical bills. It's nothing. The fierce-faced fat man wasn't angry at all. He casually pulled the seasoning off his pants and said nonchalantly, "How would I dare to trouble Annie to wash my pants? Mingji will kill me. You'll be my elder in the future." "You brat." Zhou Ruoming poked the fat man's head. "You're already sucking up?" Hehehe. The fat man laughed, and the other students who came with Zhou Ruoming also laughed without restraint. Mrs. Tang looked at the fat man in front of her helplessly. She didn't know what he was talking about, nor did she know what these people were laughing about. The only thing she understood was that the fat man didn't seem to want to hold her responsible. Mrs. Tang let out a sigh of relief and said carefully, "Then, I'll pay for this meal?" "How can I do that? Do you think our Mingji is someone who doesn't pay for his meals?" The fat man waved his hand. "Even if I don't pay for other people's meals, I still have to pay for yours. Plus, we're all family now. We can't be short of money." Zhou Ruoming heard the fat man's words and smiled proudly. This fat man was quite eye-catching. It seemed like he wasn't being nice to him for nothing. Mrs. Tang was getting more and more confused. She didn't know what the fat man was talking about. What did he mean by family doesn't lack money? What did he mean? At that moment, Tang Yun walked over from afar. The fat man didn't care about pleasing Mrs. Tang anymore. He suddenly stood up and shook his fat body, waving his hands and whistling. Zhou Ruoming's lackeys also whistled and winked at Tang Yun. "Sister-in-law is here. Sister-in-law is here." The fat man shouted. Tang Yun's face paled when she saw Zhou Ruoming and his lackeys, as well as the fatty's nonsense. She didn't think that Zhou Ruoming would be able to find his way here, not to mention spouting nonsense in front of her mother. When Zhou Ruoming wrote a love letter to Tang Yun rejected him mercilessly. However, Zhou Ruoming didn't seem to care at all. He kept pestering Tang Yun with a cheeky face until the bell rang. Tang Yun ran back to the classroom as if she was escaping. There were no movements for the past 2 days. Tang Yun thought that Zhou Ruoming had given up after being rejected. She didn't expect him to do something like this. How sad would her mother be if she thought that she was dating at school? Tang Yun stopped and didn't dare to move forward. Zhou Ruoming's passionate gaze made Tang Yun lower her head in fear. She blushed, embarrassed. "Boss, Zhou Ruoming's group is in front of us." Kang Xiaobo and Lin Yi followed behind Tang Yun. They saw Zhou Ruoming and his lackeys teasing Tang Yun. Kang Xiaobo was furious. This guy is bullying Tang Yun. "Oh, so his name is Zhou Ruoming?" Lin Yi paused. He recognized the man who was leading the group. It was the guy who got hit by a basketball a few days ago. "You know him?" Kang Xiaobo heard Lin Yi's words and paused. "He is one of the 4 big bullies. I was talking about him before. If you let him go, you are a bully." Lin Yi shook his head and smiled bitterly. It seemed like he had done it a few days ago. "I heard that Zhou Ruoming was rejected by Tang Yun. I didn't think that he would use such a despicable method. He made it a fact in front of Tang Yun's mother." Kang Xiaobo heard what the fatty was shouting and clenched his fist. Lin Yi, on the other hand, didn't think much of it. This Zhou Ruoming was a jerk, but he hadn't done anything to Lin Yi. There was no conflict of interest between them, and Lin Yi couldn't be bothered to get involved. "Sister-in-law, sit down. Mingbro has ordered the dishes. You are the only one left." The fatty winked at Tang Yun. He wanted to squeeze his eyeballs out. Chapter 86. Chapter 86, Thirdsman Misses. Tang didn't understand what they were talking about before, but when she saw Tang Yun and heard how they called Tang Yun, Mrs. Tang immediately understood what was going on. Mrs. Tang's heart sank. Was her daughter really in love? But looking at her daughter's pale face, she didn't know if it was because she was afraid that she'd find out, or if it was because Zhou Ruoming was forcing her to be his girlfriend. But no matter what, other than sadness, Mrs. Tang couldn't think of anything else. A young master like Zhou Ruoming wasn't someone she could mess with, and she knew that her words wouldn't change anything. Mrs. Tang had seen too much of the fickleness of human nature over the years. She knew how little she could do by herself. Take the electronics factory where her lover used to work, for example. A machine had damaged his sciatic nerves, and he was now paralyzed in bed. He couldn't take care of himself, and yet he didn't get a single cent of compensation from the factory. He was the boss of a small electronics factory, and because of his social connections, Mrs. Tang couldn't even call for help. The contract had been tampered with, and there wasn't even a place for her to sue. Just because she went to the factory to ask for medical fees, the boss threatened to cause trouble for her family. He said that he'd find someone to harm her daughter and burn down their house. Mrs. Tang had no choice but to give up. She was the weak one. After all, the entire family's livelihood fell on Mrs. Tang's shoulders. Fortunately, her daughter was a good student. Last semester, she got first place in the school year. Not only was her tuition free, but she also received a scholarship. This made life a little easier for the family. Mrs. Tang froze when she heard that her daughter had a boyfriend. She was angry at her daughter, but at the same time, she wondered if Zhou Ruoming was the one who forced her daughter into this relationship. But it would be fine if he really liked Tang Yin, since Zhou Ruoming's family background wasn't bad. Her daughter wouldn't lose anything if she was with him. She was just worried that he was just messing around with her, and that he'd dump her once he got bored. Mrs. Tang didn't know what the rich young masters' lives were like, but she'd heard about it from others. Tang Yin blushed. She wanted to argue, but Zhou Ruoming's reputation and all the rumors in the school made her a little timid. Rumor had it that Zhou Ruoming had once secretly dragged a girl to the outdoor toilet and raped her. After that incident, he paid the girl a sum of money and helped her transfer to another school. Although it was only hearsay, it was true that the girl had transferred to another school. It was just that the girl's family had benefited from this matter, so they naturally wouldn't make a fuss about it. Tang Yin was afraid that if she really pissed off Zhou Ruoming, he'd do anything. Although she wouldn't be like that girl who would remain silent after receiving the money and demand an explanation. But what was the use of an explanation? Tang Yin lowered her head in silence, tears welling up in her eyes. She hated her mother for not chasing Zhou Ruoming away. However, on second thought, her mother was also in a vulnerable position. She might even be more helpless. What's so good about being the campus belle? Why was he so unlucky? She'd always kept a low profile, never putting on makeup, and never wearing anything other than her school uniform. Yet, she still attracted attention. Mengyao and Yushu were also the campus belle, but would Zhou Ruoming dare to do this to them? That bunch of trash. Kang Xiaobo had been acting like a real man these 2 days. He couldn't hold it in anymore after seeing Tang Yin getting bullied by Zhou Ruoming. He clenched his fists and charged over. Linny didn't think that Kang Xiaobo would stick his nose into this. He didn't know that even a timid boy like Kang Xiaobo would explode for the goddess of his heart. This day, what a troublesome day. Linny wanted to keep a low profile for a few days, but now he couldn't. Xiaobo was already there. How could he just let it go? Was he supposed to watch Zhou Ruoming beat up Kang Xiaobo? Zhou Ruoming, are you still a man? You can't win Tang Yin's heart, so you resort to such despicable methods to force me to submit. Kang Xiaobo charged over and stood in front of Tang Yin. Zhou Ruoming was waiting for Tang Yin to make a decision. This was the effect he wanted. He wanted to force Tang Yin to make a choice. He came here to make a gesture, and that was a threat. Since he stood in front of Mrs. Tang's barbecue stall, he was telling Tang Yin that if she didn't agree today, neither she nor her mother would stop. Her mother's barbecue stall wouldn't be able to run anymore. And so, Ruoming was 50% sure that Tang Yin would say yes, even if she had no choice but to be his girlfriend. Tang Yin kept her head down and didn't say a word because she was worried about her safety, but she was also worried about her mother's barbecue stall. She knew that if she turned against Zhou Ruoming today, her mother's barbecue stall wouldn't be able to sell anymore. If Zhou Ruoming and his followers came to cause trouble every day, her family's livelihood would be cut off. Just when Tang Yin was at a loss of what to do, Kang Xiaobo suddenly charged over. Not only did Zhou Ruoming freeze, but Tang Yin also froze. Who was this person? She didn't know him? Who the fuck are you? Zhou Ruoming saw that Tang Yin was about to be forced to make a choice, but someone suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He was furious and pointed at Kang Xiaobo, his voice darkening. I. Kang Xiaobo looked at Zhou Ruoming's fierce eyes and lost his courage. He was just going to explode for a moment, and it would be over after that. He wasn't as strong as Lin Yi, and in terms of fighting, he wasn't Zhou Ruoming's opponent. He was discouraged by Zhou Ruoming's question, but he knew that he couldn't back down now. Boss was still behind him, and if he got beaten up, how could he not help? He straightened his neck and said, I am the third of the Big Four's underling. Big Fours? Third? Underling? Zhou Ruoming froze, confused by Kang Xiaobo's words. What nonsense are you talking about? You're Zhong Pingliang's underling? You fucking beat Zhong Pingliang up, and you still won't behave? How dare you butt into my business? Fuck off. Your boss doesn't even dare to butt into Ming Bro's business. Who the fuck are you? Fatty pushed Kang Xiaobo hard. Go home and tell your boss that I'll fuck his mother. Fatty obviously thought that Kang Xiaobo was Zhong Pingliang's underling, and so he was very unrestrained. News of Zhong Pingliang getting beaten up by a transfer student had spread, and Heibao Bro was arrested as well. He might be sentenced to a few years in prison, so Zhong Pingliang had lost his backing and face. Naturally, Zhou Ruoming's underling wouldn't give him face. Chapter 87. You haven't paid yet. Lin Yi didn't know who his mother was since he was young, but Lin Yi wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. Lin Yi was already brooding over the fact that he was an orphan, and now this guy was dragging his mother into it. Slap. Lin Yi slapped the fatty's face, sending him flying. With Lin Yi's strength, the fatty spun a few times on the ground like a spinning top before falling headfirst onto the ground. The left side of the fatty's face was clearly visible, and the fatty's face looked even more ferocious now. Whose mother are you trying to fuck? Lin Yi said coldly as he looked at the fatty wailing on the ground. Who the fuck are you? How dare you hit one of my men? Zhou Ruoming hadn't seen Lin Yi's face clearly, since Lin Yi's back was facing him. Lin Yi's slap was a little scary, but Zhou Ruoming didn't think much about it. After all, it was when the fatty wasn't paying attention. He subconsciously thought that the newcomer was one of Lin Yi's men, and reached out to push Lin Yi. Is your face healed? Lin Yi turned to look at Zhou Ruoming. Lin Yi? Zhou Ruoming finally recognized the man in front of him. He finally understood why he was able to send the fierce-faced fatty flying with a single slap. I'm asking you a question. Is your face healed? Lin Yi said as he looked at Zhou Ruoming. Yes, it's healed, Zhou Ruoming said, a little scared. This Lin Yi was a fucking maniac. Even Heibao Bro was crying for his mom and dad after beating him up. How could Zhou Ruoming afford to piss him off? As for Lin Yi, he was obviously asking if he was alright after being hit by the basketball that day. Oh. Lin Yi nodded and slapped Zhou Ruoming's face. Zhou Ruoming's nose was bleeding and half of his face was swollen. However, Lin Yi didn't slap him away like before. You're screwed again. Scram. Zhou Ruoming covered his face. He felt so wronged in his heart. What was this? He was just flirting with a girl, and he actually met this devil. Moreover, he didn't seem to have provoked him, did he? Wasn't it just the fierce-looking fatty saying, fuck your mother? But that wasn't to scold Lin Yi. In this day and age, who would take the initiative to be scolded? However, the situation was pressing. Zhou Ruoming had no choice but to retreat. He didn't have the courage to fight Lin Yi. He turned around and glared at Kang Xiaobo, thinking that it was this kid's fault. However, when Zhou Ruoming saw Kang Xiaobo's proud smile, he froze. He remembered what Kang Xiaobo said earlier. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be that the third of the Big Four that Kang Xiaobo mentioned was Lin Yi? Yes, there was a rumor in the school that Lin Yi had replaced Pinliang as the third of the Big Four. Fuck. Ruoming was quite troubled. Couldn't you at least explain it to him? If you said that you were Lin Yi's subordinate, why would I argue with you? I'll just turn around and leave. However, that was what Zhou Ruoming was thinking. If Kang Xiaobo had said that he was Lin Yi's subordinate, Zhou Ruoming might not have believed him. Let's go. Zhou Ruoming called for someone to help Fatty up and left Mrs. Tang's barbecue stand with his tail between his legs. The vendors around Mrs. Tang's barbecue stand looked at Lin Yi in shock. They didn't know who he was. However, they knew who Zhou Ruoming was. They saw Lin Yi hit Zhou Ruoming, but Zhou Ruoming didn't even dare let out a fart. They looked at Lin Yi with respect. This was a character that was stronger than Zhou Ruoming. Tang Yun, are you okay? Kang Xiaobo was close to the goddess of his heart for the first time. Although he knew that it was impossible for him and Tang Yun to be together, it was good to be able to talk to her. Now that there was a chance, Kang Xiaobo didn't want to let it go. However, because of his nervousness, Kang Xiaobo was stuttering when he spoke. Tang Yun frowned slightly. She had heard about the new Big Four's third brother, Lin Yi. She saw that the boy from before was Lin Yi, and that this Kang Xiaobo was his subordinate. She was naturally on guard. News of Lin Yi's exploits had spread. He'd taught Pinliang a lesson as soon as he'd transferred, and now he'd slapped Zhou Ruoming in the face. Tang Yin was a little afraid of him now, thinking that he might be up to no good, that he'd slapped Zhou Ruoming to get on her good side. As for Kang Xiaobo, Tang Yun already saw him as Lin Yi's lackey. She didn't have a good impression of him. She heard his question and replied faintly, "I'm fine." She then quickly ran to Mrs. Tang's side. "Mom?" "Ah." Mrs. Tang understood that Zhou Ruoming was bothering her daughter. She was happy, but also afraid of Zhou Ruoming's revenge. However, seeing that Lin Yi was able to deal with Zhou Ruoming made her heart flutter. Whether it was looks or temperament, Lin Yi was much better than Zhou Ruoming. It wouldn't be bad if he became her daughter's boyfriend. At least she wouldn't have to worry about Zhou Ruoming. However, Mrs. Tang was just thinking about it. She didn't want her daughter to be wronged. Xiaobo could tell that Tang Yun didn't like talking to him, and he was a little discouraged. But he understood the difference between them, and it was basically impossible for them to get together. He didn't think too much about it. Auntie, 20 mutton skewers, 2 lamb chops, 2 chicken neck skewers, 2 tofu rolls, and 2 bottles of beer. Kang Xiaobo quickly adjusted his position and became happy again. Although he didn't get Tang Yun's favor, at least he could hold his head high in front of Zhou Ruoming. "What are you guys so arrogant for? In front of my boss, aren't you guys just getting slapped in the face?" "Okay." Mrs. Tang nodded. These two were even stronger than Zhou Ruoming. After all, she had to take care of them. "Zhou Ruoming, wait." Lin Yi suddenly called out to Zhou Ruoming. Zhou Ruoming was startled by Lin Yi's voice. He didn't know what Lin Yi wanted. Didn't he tell him to leave? Why did he call him back? Although he didn't want to go back, he had to go back. He could run, but he couldn't run away. If Lin Yi came looking for trouble, he wouldn't be able to handle it. Lin Yi, is there anything else?" Zhou Ruoming turned around with a bitter face. "You haven't paid yet," Lin Yi said faintly. In fact, Lin Yi felt that Mrs. Tang was pitiful. It wasn't easy for her to support the barbecue stall alone. He wanted to help if he could. Chapter 88. Let you pretend, here's 100 kwai. Keep the change. Zhou Ruoming took out 100 kwai note and slapped it in front of Mrs. Tang. He didn't want to stay another minute. Lin Yi was watching him, and it made him feel uncomfortable. "That won't do," Mrs. Tang said, looking for change. Ruoming waved his hand with a bitter smile before turning around and leaving without a second glance back. Mrs. Tang had thought that Zhou Ruoming wouldn't be able to get the money back for the meal. They'd ordered 50 to 60 kwai worth of food and drinks, and Mrs. Tang only earned around 100 kwai a day. She'd lost half of it in one go, and while it was a pity, she didn't dare ask Zhou Ruoming for the money. She didn't think that one word from Lin Yi would make Zhou Ruoming pay up like a good boy, and he didn't even need the change. Mrs. Tang couldn't help but feel grateful towards Lin Yi. They were all young masters at school, but why was there such a big difference between them? Look at Lin Yi. He looked like a gentleman, and look at that Zhou Ruoming. The only thing missing was that his face was a bully. But the bully was slapped in the face by a gentleman, and didn't even dare make a sound before running away. The thought made her look at Lin Yi a lot more pleasing to the eye. She looked at Tang Yin, who was still standing there, staring at Lin Yi and Kang Xiaobo, not knowing what she was thinking. Yin, what are you doing? Aren't you going to help your classmates? Tang Yin didn't think that Lin Yi and Kang Xiaobo would be sitting at her barbecue stand, asking for food. As far as she was concerned, Kang Xiaobo jumping out to fight Zhou Ruoming was most likely ordered by Lin Yi. He probably had the same thoughts as Zhou Ruoming, and their target was her. Other than that, Tang Yin didn't know what else could attract the attention of these young masters. Although Lin Yi wasn't as blatant as Zhou Ruoming, and was instead a gentleman, Lin Yi was even more of a hypocrite in Tang Yin's eyes. He was just fighting Zhou Ruoming and Fatty, and now he was sitting there like a good student. Who was he trying to fool? Especially when she saw that her mother seemed to have a good impression of Lin Yi, and even asked her to serve them. Tang Yin was even more annoyed. She only asked for 100 kuai for you. How could you fall for it so easily? Tang Yin was like a little hedgehog. She had been through all these years, and her heart had been locked tightly. Whenever a boy approached her, she would be on guard. But, since her mother had called her, Tang Yin could only agree no matter how unwilling she was. She went to the stand and took 2 bottles of beer and placed them on Lin Yi and Kang Xiaobo's table. She didn't even look at them and returned to Mrs. Tang's side. Wine starter. Kang Xiaobo saw that Tang Yin only took the bottle of beer and didn't pick up the starter, and that Tang Yin was unhappy. He could only smile bitterly and ask carefully, Yin, what's wrong? Can you open the bottle for your classmate? Mrs. Tang didn't know what was going on with Tang Yun. She was fine just a moment ago, but all of a sudden, her face turned cold. She lowered her head like she was wronged when facing Zhou Ruoming. But when facing Lin Yi, she turned on him just because he was a nice guy? If Tang Yi knew what her mother was thinking, she would explode in anger. He was polite and polite. Just now, he had sent the fierce-faced fatty flying with a slap. Was that considered gentlemanly? It's fine. Lin Yi smiled. He didn't know what he did to piss off this pretty girl. Lin Yi could see that Tang Yin's attitude wasn't good, but he didn't mind it. He just thought that she was acting like a little girl. With that, Lin Yi picked up the bottle and flicked the cap with his thumb, and the bottle was opened. Xiaobo's bottle followed the same pattern. Only your classmate is easy to talk to. If it was the previous Zhou Ruoming, he would have destroyed the stall. Mrs. Tang looked at her daughter helplessly. You don't want me to do business anymore? Go back to school. I don't need you here anymore. Tang Yin felt wronged after being scolded by her mother. What did she mean by my classmate is easy to talk to? How could he be easy to talk to? How could the Big Four be easy to talk to? Look at how polite he is. Don't you know that he's just putting on an act? Is he trying to chase after your daughter? All right, the tofu rolls are done. Hurry up and send them over. Mrs. Tang said as she handed the tofu rolls to Tang Yun. Oh. Tang Yin took the tofu rolls angrily and slowly walked over to Lin Yi. The more she looked at Lin Yi's calm face, the more irritated she felt. When she reached Lin Yi's side, Tang Yin didn't know where the courage came from, but she pretended to step on Lin Yi's foot carelessly. Humph! Aren't you pretending to be polite? You want to please my mother? No way, I won't let you. If you want to pretend to be polite in front of me, then fine. I'll stomp you to death and see if you'll get mad. Lin Yi was a bit surprised to be stepped on by Tang Yin out of nowhere. He raised his head and looked at Tang Yin, who had a dark expression on her face. Although the force wasn't really painful to Lin Yi should at least defend himself after being stepped on for no reason, right? Lin Yi was just about to open his mouth when Tang Yin's heart jumped a little. She thought to herself, I told you to pretend. Just pretend. I'll treat you like this if you pretend again in the future. She smiled apologetically. Sorry, I accidentally stepped on you. Oh, it's nothing. Lin Yi saw that Tang Yin had already admitted her mistake and couldn't say anything else. He smiled bitterly and shook his head. However, after Tang Yin apologized, she didn't move her foot away immediately. Instead, she stepped on him a few more times before moving her foot away. Her eyes flashed with a sly smile as she put down the tofu roll and ran away quickly. Lin Yi was speechless. Tang Yin was doing it on purpose. These girls. Lin Yi didn't know what to say. Did he look like someone who could be bullied so easily? It was Yushu and Mengyao before, but Yushu was smart and had something on him, so he let it go. Meng Yao's father was his employer, so Lin couldn't say anything. But Tang Yin was taking the initiative to step on him. Forget it. He couldn't be bothered to argue with her. If this got out, he'd be a laughing stock. The Great Eagle was being bullied by a few women. Boss, Tang Yin seems to have something against you? Did you piss her off? Kong Xiaobo also noticed that something was wrong. Tang Yin seemed to be targeting Lin Yi. How would I know? This is the first time I've seen her. Lin Yi shook his head. Chapter 89. What the hell? She's not the prettiest I've ever seen, but she's definitely one of the best. How could I not have an impression of her? Lin Yi shrugged innocently. That's true. Kong Xiaobo nodded in agreement at Lin Yi's words. Tang Yun's beauty was the kind that people wouldn't easily forget. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many boys who were mesmerized by Tang Yun's beauty after just one look. Whatever, let's eat. I'm hungry. Lin Yi grabbed a tofu roll and stuffed it into his mouth. Not bad, it's pretty good. Heh, of course. Whose mom did this? Kong Xiaobo chuckled in satisfaction at Lin Yi's praise. Lin Yi looked at Kong Xiaobo, not knowing what to say. You sound like I'm your mom? Ahem. Kong Xiaobo coughed awkwardly. Let's eat. Let's eat. Here, boss, a toast to you. Kong Xiaobo raised his beer. Lin Yi smiled and raised his beer as well, clinking it with Kong Xiaobo's. It didn't take long for the other dishes that Kong Xiaobo ordered to arrive. Tang Yin, however, seemed to be looking for trouble. She'd either throw the skewers on the table or bump into Lin Yi on purpose. This pretty girl was quite interesting. Lin Yi looked at the angry Tang Yin. He found it funny. She wanted to kick him out. There was a class at night, so Lin Yi and Kong Xiaobo didn't drink much. They finished the bottle in their hands and finished the food on the table. Kong Xiaobo stood up to pay the bill. Auntie, how much is it? Yin, go and do the math. Mrs. Tang still had a few more sets of barbecue on the other tables, so she sent Tang Yun to do the math. 80. Tang Yun came to Lin Yi's table and glared at Lin Yi, thinking that he'd be a scammer. Kong Xiaobo blinked. He and Lin Yi ordered at most 40 kwai. How could it be 80? But seeing how confident Tang Yin was, he didn't want to argue with his goddess. He took out a 100 kwai bill from his pocket and handed it to Tang Yin. Wait, Lin Yi stopped Kong Xiaobo. I think I got it wrong. I calculated it. 20 mutton skewers is 20 kwai, 2 lamb chops is 8 kwai, 2 chicken necks is 4 kwai, 2 tofu rolls is 2 kwai, 2 bottles of beer is 4 kwai. That's 38 kwai, right? Tang Yin didn't expect Lin Yi to calculate the bill with her. She blushed and felt uncomfortable. She wasn't a greedy person. The reason why she said 80 kwai was because she was annoyed with Lin Yi's gentlemanly behavior. She wanted to expose him, but Lin Yi didn't say anything. This made Tang Yin even angrier. She thought, since you like to pretend so much, then go ahead and pretend. I'll charge you a bit more to vent my anger. In the end, Shield Bro questioned Tang Yin when she said 80 kwai. Yin, what's wrong with you? How can you calculate the bill? Although Mrs. Tang was busy with the barbecue, Tang Yin wasn't far from her. She could hear the conversation between Tang Yin and Lin Yi clearly. She was angry when she saw her daughter giving a random price to the customer. She scolded her daughter with a stern face. Tang Yin was already angry because of Lin Yi. Now that she was scolded by her mother, she couldn't hold it anymore. She pursed her lips and raised her head to look at Lin Yi. Her eyes were spitting fire. She wanted to burn Lin Yi to death. I don't want the money anymore. Leave. I'll treat you to this meal. I don't want to see you again. She was on the verge of sobbing. She didn't wait for Lin Yi to say anything before covering her face and running away. She didn't even say goodbye to Mrs. Tang, who was beside her as she ran towards the school. Tang Yin's strong reaction surprised Lin Yi. He didn't expect Tang Yin to have such a strong side. This child. Mrs. Tang didn't know what was wrong with her daughter today. The boy in front of her helped her out. Not only was she not grateful, but she was also angry at him. This put her in a difficult position. She looked at Lin Yi apologetically. Young man, Yin isn't like this usually. She's very sensible. I don't know what's wrong with her today. I'm sorry. I'll treat you to this meal. I won't charge you. You still have to pay, Linny smiled. He felt around his pocket and found 40 kwai in change. He gave it to Mrs. Tang. Here's 40. I'm a little thirsty. Here are 2 bottles of water. Keep the change. Lin Yi didn't wait for Mrs. Tang to reply. He took out 2 bottles of water and gave one to Kong Xiaobo. Let's go. Kong Xiaobo snapped out of his daze. He didn't know what to do as he watched Tang Yin run away. He didn't know what to do until Lin Yi paid for the water. Boss, why are you treating us? Didn't I say I'd pay? Haha, it's the same. You can treat us next time. Lin Yi turned around and walked towards the school. Kong Xiaobo quickly said goodbye to Mrs. Tang and followed Lin Yi. Next time. Mrs. Tang nodded enthusiastically at Kong Xiaobo. Of course. Kong Xiaobo replied. What a sensible child. Mrs. Tang sighed as she watched Lin Yi's back. She didn't know what was wrong with her baby girl. She was afraid that these 2 wouldn't come again. Boss, what happened today is weird. Xiaobo caught up to Lin Yi, but Tang Yun was nowhere to be seen. She was long gone, evidently long gone. What's weird about it? Lin Yi didn't think too much about it. You, on the other hand, be careful. Don't let Zhou Ruoming cause trouble for you. With Lin Yi's reminder, Kong Xiaobo remembered that he had offended Zhou Ruoming's group. Boss, don't scare me. I just offended Zhong Pingliang, and now Zhou Ruoming. How am I supposed to live here? Don't be too flamboyant. They won't do anything to me if I follow you. Lin Yi said. You're right, but boss, the news of you slapping Zhou Ruoming's probably going to get out pretty soon. You're going to be one of the big 4 soon. Xiaobo said with a chuckle. What's so good about that? Lin Yi glared at him. What happened today was purely because of you. Now I have to bear the name of a big 4. No way, boss. Can you bear to see Tang Yin get bullied? Kong Xiaobo smiled. Chapter 90. Taking out his anger on the test paper. Chapter 90. Venting his anger on the test paper. Xiaobo stuck his head out of the window as he walked past 12th grade class 9, trying to see if Tang Yin was in the classroom. His neck was about to turn into a giraffe when Lin Yi pulled him back. All right, if the homeroom teacher of class 9 sees you, you'll be in for it. Ugh. Kong Xiaobo pulled his head back. I wonder if Tang Yin is back yet? You think you can catch up to her? Lin Yi asked impolitely as he looked at Kong Xiaobo. Nope. Xiaobo, on the other hand, was quite self-aware as he shook his head. Then why are you still looking? What a waste of time. Lin Yi smacked the back of his head. Go back and study. Let's see what you're going to do if you can't get into university. It's not that I can't catch up to her, but do you think it's possible for you, boss? Xiaobo smiled bitterly. I was thinking that maybe Tang Yun would treat you differently after you saved the damsel in distress. Who knew? She'd treat you differently. HM? Kong Xiaobo's words made Lin Yi think of another problem. Did Tang Yun think that he was saving the damsel in distress? Or did she use Zhou Ruoming to put on a show? If that was the case, she might have misunderstood that he was pursuing her like Zhou Ruoming. If that was the case, then Tang Yun's abnormal behavior was understandable. What a girl with a strong sense of self-awareness. A faint smile appeared on Lin Yi's lips. But it was interesting. If it weren't for the fact that he had a mission to attend to, he would have thrown himself into school life and enjoyed the flirtatious, subtle relationships between students of his age. Let's go. Class is about to start. Lin Yi reminded Kong Xiaobo as he quickened his footsteps. The bell for the evening class had already rung. Kong Xiaobo did not dare to stay any longer. He followed Lin Yi into grade 12 class 5's classroom. Meng Yao and Yushu had returned a long time ago, and they were whispering something to each other. Yushu glanced at Lin Yi before turning back to her conversation with Meng Yao. What surprised Lin Yi was that Pinliang wasn't in the classroom. His 2 underlings, Gao Xiaofu and Zhang Naipeo, were there, but Pinliang's seat was empty. But it didn't take long for Xiaobo to get some information from someone else. A police car had come to the school and taken Pinliang away. This result surprised Lin Yi. Could it be because of Brother Heibao? If Heibao bro couldn't hold on and bit Pinliang out, then it meant that the kid was pretty unlucky. The tutoring class at night was also a test. An hour before, the students handed in their test papers, and the committee member in charge of studying would take a stack of papers and hand them out randomly. The teacher would then explain the questions while the students marked each other's papers before summarizing the results. This way, the teacher wouldn't have to mark the papers. In the 12th grade, there were tests almost every day, and this was quite suitable for the fast-paced life. What surprised Lin Yi, however, was that the committee member in charge of studying was Yu Shu. He hadn't expected this girl to be in charge of the class. After the exam, Yu Shu handed out a stack of test papers as she walked up to Lin Yi. She didn't even look at Lin Yi as she tossed him a test paper with a straight face and went off to hand out the others. Yu Shu smiled evilly as she turned around, but quickly put it away. Meng Yao? Lin Yi was speechless as he looked at the name on the test paper. How could there be such a coincidence? Lin Yi was 100% sure that Yu Shu had done it on purpose. Most of the boys in the class dreamed of marking Meng Yao's or Yu Shu's papers one day. It was just a paper, but the fact that it was something they'd worked on meant that there'd still be traces of the two of them left on it. Doing it this way would be a way to get closer to them and satisfy their fantasies. Regrettably, however, Yu Shu and Meng Yao's papers were always swapped. As time went by, Yu Shu would be suspected of using her position to cheat, but no one dared to expose it. This time, however, Yu Shu gave Meng Yao's paper to Lin Yi, leaving her and Lin Yi's papers last. She was planning to give Lin Yi's paper to Meng Yao, creating a coincidence. After handing out the papers, Yu Shu took the two papers back to her seat and put them in front of Meng Yao with a smile. Yao Yao, you pick one? What do you mean? Don't we always mark each other's papers? Meng Yao looked at Yu Shu strangely. This time, I accidentally gave out your paper. Yu Shu explained. So, forget it. Meng Yao knew that Yu Shu would make a mistake every time she did this. She might have accidentally given out the wrong paper. Whatever, anyone will do. Meng Yao didn't care since it wasn't her paper. Oh, I'll give you this one then. Yu Shu tossed Lin Yi's test paper to Meng Yao before sneaking her own test paper to Lin Yi. Lin Yi? Meng Yao looked at the name on the paper and paused for a moment before understanding what was going on. She turned around and saw Yu Shu, who was pretending to be fine. Yu Shu was the one who did it. Meng Yao knew it was Yu Shu. Yao Yao, what's up? Yu Shu raised her head with a smile, as if she didn't know what was going on. Let me see your paper. Meng Yao looked at the paper Yu Shu was covering tightly. She wanted to snatch it away. What's there to look at? Yu Shu felt guilty as she tightened her grip on the paper. Give it to me. Meng Yao snatched Yu Shu's paper away forcefully, and Yu Shu let go, afraid that she'd tear the paper. Meng Yao, on the other hand, glared at Yu Shu when she realized that it was her own paper. Shu, where did you put my paper? I gave it to Shield Bro. He took it away. Yu Shu thought evilly. Yes, he did. I'm so pissed. Meng Yao was speechless at Yu Shu's actions, but she was used to Yu Shu's personality. She knew that Yu Shu was the type that wanted to see the world in chaos, so she didn't say anything. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.